You step into a world of flickering candlelight and hushed secrets, where the air hums with intrigue and ambition. The cobblestones beneath your feet are worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, many belonging to figures rarely acknowledged in polite society. Forget the simple narrative. We are venturing beyond the castle walls and the dusty chronicles of kings. You are about to uncover the compelling, often dangerous, lives of medieval courtesans. These women were more than just figures of pleasure. They were strategists, artists, confidants, and sometimes spies. They navigated a complex tapestry of power, fashion, and intellectual pursuit, leaving an indelible yet often overlooked mark on history. Prepare to peer through the velvet shadow, into a world where charm was currency and wit was a weapon. You stand now on the cusp of an era often misunderstood, where the rigid lines of social order blurred in the glow of the hearth fire and the clinking of goblets. The world we enter is not one of simple morality tales, but of intricate human relationships and survival. When you hear the word courtesan, your mind might conjure images from later centuries, perhaps the lavish boudoirs of Renaissance Italy or the glittering salons of 18th century Paris. But turn back the clock further. Cast your gaze to the medieval period, a time before such clear definitions existed, yet where women of exceptional charm, intellect, and beauty carved out lives of extraordinary influence, often defying the strictures placed upon their sex. Imagine yourself strolling through the bustling streets of a medieval city, perhaps Florence or Paris in the 13th or 14th century. The air is thick with the scent of spices, wood smoke, and unwashed humanity. Merchants hawk their wares, artisans hammer at their crafts, and the distant peal of church bells marks the passage of time. Amidst this cacophony, you might catch a glimpse of a woman whose attire, demeanor, and entourage set her apart. She is not a noble woman, identifiable by her heraldic display, nor is she a common laborer, her hands calloused and her clothes coarse. No, this woman moves with a different kind of grace, an air of self-possession that hints at a power not bestowed by birthright, but meticulously cultivated. These were the courtesans, though the term itself is more a later invention to encapsulate their unique position. In the medieval period they were known by various names, sometimes less flattering, sometimes more poetic. Filles de joie, maitresses, concubines for those attached to specific powerful men, or simply women of the court who held an unofficial but significant sway. What distinguished them from mere prostitutes was not simply their clientele, which certainly included the highest echelons of society, kings, princes, wealthy merchants, high-ranking clergy, but their entire way of life. They were, in essence, highly skilled professionals whose currency was not just their physical beauty, but their wit, their education, their artistic talents, and their ability to navigate the treacherous currents of medieval courtly and urban life. Consider the expectations placed upon a medieval lady of noble birth. Her life was often circumscribed by marriage, childbearing, and managing a household. Education for her might extend to basic literacy, perhaps some music or needlework. But for the courtesan, education was survival. You would find her not just literate, but often fluent in multiple languages, conversant in poetry, history, and philosophy. She might be a skilled musician, playing the lute or harp with a captivating touch, or possess a voice trained to sing ballads that could charm a king. She would be an exceptional conversationalist, able to discuss politics, theology, and art with equal facility, offering astute observations and witty retorts that entertained and enlightened her powerful patrons. Think of the lavish banquets you might attend in a lord's castle. The food is rich, the wine flows freely, and the hall is filled with laughter and the murmur of conversation. But it is often the courtesan who becomes the center of attention, not merely as an ornament, but as an intellectual equal or even superior to many of the men present. She can hold her own in a debate, offer counsel on matters of state, or compose an impromptu verse that earns the admiration of all. Her presence elevates the gathering, making it a place of culture and refinement, not just mere indulgence. Her appearance, too, was a carefully constructed statement. While noblewomen were often constrained by sumptuary laws that dictated what they could wear based on their rank, courtesans often found ways to circumvent these rules, or simply to flout them with impunity, especially if they were under the protection of a powerful patron. You might see her in silks and velvets imported from distant lands, adorned with jewels that outshone those of many a duchess. Her hair might be styled in daring new fashions, her makeup applied with a subtle artistry designed to enhance her features, not merely to mask them. She was a trendsetter, an influencer of taste, a walking advertisement for luxury and sophistication in an age when such things were highly valued but not always readily accessible. This careful cultivation of self was not mere vanity, it was a fundamental aspect of her profession. Her home, often a well-appointed house in a desirable part of the city, served as her salon, a place where influential men could gather, away from the prying eyes of their wives and the formalities of court. Here you might find scholarly discussions unfolding, political alliances being forged, and artistic endeavors supported. The courtesan acted as hostess, facilitator, and sometimes even as an agent of espionage, subtly extracting information or relaying messages for her patrons. Imagine the risk inherent in such a life. While a powerful patron offered protection and wealth, that protection was often tenuous, dependent on his continued favor and health. A change in political winds, the death of a patron, or simply the waning of his affection could plunge a courtesan from luxury into destitution. She lived on the edge, always aware that her position was precarious, her livelihood tied to her ability to maintain her desirability and her utility to those in power. She had no husband to legally protect her, no family name to fall back on, and often no legitimate claim to property or inheritance. Yet, many courtesans managed to accumulate considerable wealth and even exert significant social and political influence. They often invested in property, lent money, and established networks of contacts that extended throughout their cities and beyond. Some even became benefactors of churches or hospitals, attempting to secure their spiritual salvation or gain a measure of respectability in a society that simultaneously condemned and indulged them. Their intelligence, resourcefulness, and sheer force of personality allowed them to navigate a world designed to exclude them from power and agency. Consider the role of the courtesan in the burgeoning urban centers of late medieval Europe. As cities grew, so did a new class of wealthy merchants and bankers, men who sought pleasures and intellectual stimulation beyond what their traditional social circles offered. These men, often new to immense wealth, desired to emulate the aristocracy in their tastes and patronage. The courtesan, with her refined manners, cultural knowledge, and ability to host sophisticated gatherings, filled a vital social niche. She provided a space for these men to display their wealth and sophistication, to engage in intellectual discourse, and to enjoy female companionship that was more stimulating and less constrained than that offered by their wives, who were often confined to domestic duties. You might wonder how these women came to this life. For some, it might have been a desperate choice, a path taken due to poverty or lack of family support. But for many others, it was a deliberate, even ambitious decision. A young woman with exceptional beauty and intelligence, but without the dowry or noble birth to secure an advantageous marriage, might see the life of a courtesan as a route to independence, wealth, and influence far beyond what a conventional marriage could offer. She traded the security of a husband for the freedom to control her own destiny, albeit within a highly constrained and often dangerous framework. Think of the skills required to maintain such a delicate balance. She had to be an astute judge of character, discerning true affections from fleeting whims, identifying potential rivals or dangers, and understanding the unspoken power dynamics at play in any interaction. She needed diplomatic skills, a sharp tongue tempered with charm, and an unwavering self-possession. Her body was her capital, yes, but her mind and her spirit were her true tools for building a lasting, if unconventional, career. The Church, of course, viewed these women with moral condemnation, often lumping them together with common prostitutes and denying them Christian burial or other religious rites. Society's judgment was harsh, yet simultaneously, society's elite clamored for their company. This paradox highlights the hypocrisy and complexity of medieval morality, where religious doctrine often clashed with human desire and the realities of power. The courtesan existed in this liminal space, both outcast and indispensable. As you delve deeper into their stories, you begin to appreciate the remarkable resilience and ingenuity of these women. They were pioneers in their own way, forging paths in a world that sought to limit and define them. They understood the power of perception, the art of persuasion, and the subtle dance of influence. They built lives not on titles or inherited lands, but on their own charisma, their intelligence, and their unwavering determination to survive and thrive. So, as you walk these phantom streets, let go of preconceived notions. Listen closely to the echoes of their laughter, the whisper of their silken gowns, the intelligent murmur of their conversations. These women were not mere footnotes in history, they were active participants, shaping culture, influencing politics, and leaving an often invisible yet undeniably powerful legacy. You are seeing a side of medieval society often swept under the rug, a vibrant, complex world pulsating with the ambitions and desires of figures who lived brilliantly in the velvet shadow. Their stories offer a unique window into the true multifaceted nature of medieval life, far removed from the idealized images of knights and ladies. You have glimpsed the broad strokes of their existence, the outline of their influence. Now, let us delve deeper into what truly set these women apart, what transformed them from mere figures of pleasure into figures of power and intrigue. To understand the medieval courtesan, you must first clear away the cobwebs of modern assumption and the simplistic categorizations that have often obscured their true nature. They were not simply prostitutes, nor were they merely mistresses. Their craft was far more intricate, their position far more nuanced. Imagine for a moment the bustling, often grimy streets of a medieval city. You walk past the taverns, the inns, the dimly lit alleys where women of the night might ply their trade. These are the streetwalkers, the common prostitutes, offering fleeting solace or simple physical release to the weary traveler, the lonely merchant, or the dissolute nobleman. Their lives were often harsh, their futures bleak, their social standing at the very bottom rung of society. Their transactions were typically quick, transactional, and devoid of genuine connection or intellectual exchange. They lived on the fringes, their presence tolerated but rarely acknowledged with respect or even curiosity. Now shift your gaze. You turn a corner, perhaps onto a wider, cleaner thoroughfare. You see a grander house, its windows draped in fine fabrics, its doorway perhaps guarded by a servant. Inside, or arriving at this dwelling in a richly appointed carriage, you might encounter a courtesan. The difference is stark, immediate, and profound. The courtesan did not stand on a street corner. She did not hawk her wares in a public square. Her services were not advertised openly, nor were they cheap. Her clientele was select, often exclusive, drawn from the highest echelons of society. Powerful nobles, influential clergy, wealthy merchants, even kings themselves. She operated within a different sphere entirely, a world of intricate social dances, intellectual stimulation, and often, genuine affection or profound companionship. Her craft began with education, an asset almost universally denied to women of her era, even those born into noble families. While a noble daughter might learn basic literacy, perhaps some music or needlework, the courtesan often received an education that rivaled, and sometimes surpassed, that of learned men. You would find her fluent in several languages. Latin, essential for scholarly discourse. French, the language of courtly love and diplomacy. Italian, if she resided in the vibrant city-states. She studied poetry, philosophy, history, and the arts. She could recite verses from memory, discuss theological points with a cardinal, or debate political strategies with a duke. Her mind was a finely honed instrument, as captivating as her physical beauty. Think of the conversations you might have with her. They would not be superficial exchanges about the weather or the latest scandal. They would be deep, engaging dialogues, punctuated by wit, insight, and a profound understanding of the world around her. She was a muse, an intellectual sparring partner, a confidant who could offer astute advice or a different perspective on complex matters of state or personal dilemma. This intellectual prowess was not merely a decorative accessory, it was a fundamental component of her value, a key to her longevity and influence. It secured her a place at tables where wives were often silent and daughters unseen. Beyond intellect, there was the mastery of social grace. You observe her at a private gathering. She moves with an effortless elegance, her posture regal, her gestures refined. She knows the intricacies of courtly etiquette, the subtle nuances of social hierarchy, the delicate art of charming every person in a room without appearing manipulative or overly eager. She can listen intently, offer precisely the right compliment, diffuse tension with a well-placed joke, or steer a conversation towards a more agreeable topic. She understood the power of discretion, the importance of keeping secrets, and the art of making her patron feel like the most intelligent, captivating man in the room. Her appearance, too, was a testament to her craft and her success. You would see her dressed in the finest silks and velvets, adorned with jewels that whispered of prosperity rather than screamed of ostentation. Her gowns were fashion-forward, perhaps even setting trends, crafted by the most skilled tailors. Her hair would be artfully styled, her skin cared for with costly unguents and perfumes. Every detail, from the delicate embroidery on her sleeve to the scent that clung to her, was a carefully chosen element designed to enhance her allure and reinforce her elevated status. This was not mere vanity, it was an investment in her brand, a visual declaration of her worth and the wealth of her patrons. But her craft extended far beyond intellectual and social graces. It encompassed a shrewd understanding of economics and self-management. Unlike common prostitutes, who were often exploited and impoverished, many courtesans were remarkably wealthy and financially independent. You would find them owning property, sometimes multiple houses. They invested in businesses, lent money, and managed their own affairs with a keen business acumen that would rival any merchant or banker. They understood contracts, property rights, and the intricacies of inheritance law, often ensuring their own financial security and that of any children they might have, without reliance on a male protector. Consider the risk they mitigated. In a society where women had few legal rights and even noble women were dependent on fathers, husbands, or brothers, the courtesan carved out a path of astonishing autonomy. She was her own master, her own advocate. Her wealth gave her leverage, her independence gave her freedom, and her intelligence allowed her to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval finance and social politics. You might even find her acting as a patron herself, supporting artists, poets, or scholars, further cementing her cultural influence and demonstrating her considerable resources. And then there was their profound political and social influence. You witness a duke leaning close to her, whispering in her ear, seeking her counsel on a delicate matter of state. Or perhaps a cardinal confides in her the latest gossip from the Vatican, knowing she possesses a network of informants and a keen sense for the undercurrents of power. Courtesans were often vital conduits of information, their homes serving as informal salons where powerful men relaxed their guard and spoke more freely than they would in court or council. They heard secrets, observed alliances shifting, and gathered intelligence that could be incredibly valuable to those who understood how to listen and interpret. They could subtly influence decisions, mediate disputes, or even serve as unofficial diplomats. Their beauty and charm opened doors, but it was their intellect, discretion, and access to powerful ears that gave them true leverage. You see how she subtly guides a conversation, how a well-timed question or an insightful observation can shift the perspective of a powerful man. She did not wield a sword or command an army, but she possessed a different kind of power. The power of persuasion, the power of access, the power of a keen mind applied to human weakness and ambition. Oh, when you reflect on the medieval courtesan, strip away the simplistic labels. See her not as a victim, though life was undeniably precarious for any woman outside traditional roles. See her instead as an architect of her own destiny, a woman who leveraged her intellect, her charm, her social acumen, and her understanding of human nature to carve out a life of relative independence and considerable influence. Her craft was a delicate balance of performance and genuine connection, of allure and intellect, of economic shrewdness and social mastery. It demanded constant vigilance, an acute awareness of her environment, and an unwavering commitment to self-preservation and advancement. She was a scholar without a university, an artist of conversation, a diplomat without a title, a businesswoman without a guild. You are seeing now that the boudoir, while certainly a part of her life, was far from the sum of it. The true distinction of the courtesan lay in the breadth of her skills, the depth of her intellect, and the sheer audacity with which she navigated a world not designed for her empowerment. She cultivated a persona, built a reputation, and managed her relationships with the precision of a master artisan. Her life was a tapestry woven with threads of cunning, courage, and an indomitable spirit, creating a legacy often erased but undeniably present in the very fabric of medieval power and culture. She was a singular force, charting her own course in an age of rigid social structures, proving that true power could be found not just in inherited status, but in the cultivated self. Oh, you have seen her resilience, her calculated risks, her sheer will to carve a space for herself in the unforgiving tapestry of the medieval world. But how did she truly command the attention of kings, popes, and the most powerful men of her age? How did she, without inherited title or a husband's name, become a force whispered about in gilded halls and clandestine chambers alike? Her secret lay not in outward beauty alone, though that was often present, but in a profound, cultivated mastery of the intangible, charm, wit, and the subtle art of influence. Imagine yourself now stepping into her private salon, a room perhaps dimly lit by flickering tapers, or bathed in the soft glow filtering through stained glass. The air is thick with the scent of spices and something else, something indefinable, anticipation, intellect, allure. You hear the murmur of voices, the gentle strum of a lute, perhaps a quiet laugh. As she enters, or as you are presented to her, there is an immediate shift. She does not need to raise her voice or command silence. Her presence simply fills the space, a magnetic field drawing all eyes, all ears towards her. This is not mere theatricality, it is the culmination of years of deliberate self-sculpting. Her voice first captivates you. It is not shrill or overly loud, but modulated, clear, and perfectly pitched for the intimate exchanges that are her forte. She chooses her words with the precision of an artisan selecting gems for a crown. You notice her diction, flawless, reflecting an education far superior to most noble women of her era, who might be literate but rarely truly learned. She speaks not only the common tongue of the court but often several languages, each rolled out with an effortless grace that suggests long practice and inherent talent. A snippet of Latin here, a phrase of Italian there, a philosophical observation in French, all woven seamlessly into the fabric of her conversation, not to boast but to enrich, to connect, to intrigue. Her wit is not sharp in a cruel way, but rather like a finely honed rapier, quick, dazzling, and always hitting its mark with elegant precision. You might offer a jest, and she will return it with a counterpoint that makes you smile, perhaps even blush, but never feel diminished. She uses humor to disarm, to build rapport, to lighten a tense discussion, or to underscore a deeper point with memorable clarity. You realize quickly that she is not merely reciting clever phrases. She is thinking, processing, and responding in real time, demonstrating an intellectual agility that few can match. This is the mark of a truly cultivated mind, one that has not just absorbed knowledge, but internalized it and can wield it as a powerful instrument. Where did this formidable intellect come from? You might ask yourself. In an age where formal education for women was scant, especially for those not destined for a convent, she sought knowledge with an insatiable hunger. Her mentors were not always official tutors, but often the very men who frequented her company: scholars, poets, diplomats, even princes. She learned by listening intently, by asking insightful questions, by devouring every scroll and illuminated manuscript she could lay her hands on. Her chambers were likely repositories of books, not merely for display but for genuine study. You imagine her late into the night, by the solitary glow of a lamp, poring over ancient texts, learning the histories of kingdoms, the philosophies of forgotten sages, the intricate dance of diplomacy that shaped the known world. This expansive knowledge was not academic affectation. It was her currency. You might find yourself discussing the latest political machinations in a distant kingdom, and she will offer an astute analysis that demonstrates a deep understanding of allegiances, power dynamics, and human motivations. You might speak of a new astrological prediction, and she will respond with a nuanced perspective drawn from ancient lore and contemporary thought. She could converse with a theologian about Aquinas, with an artist about perspective, with a general about siege tactics, and with a merchant about trade routes. There was almost no subject upon which she could not engage intelligently, offering not just agreement, but often a fresh, compelling insight that illuminated the topic anew. This made her company indispensable. Powerful men, burdened by the weight of their responsibilities, surrounded by sycophants and often isolated by their status, found in her a rare confidant and an intellectual equal. You see them drawn to her not just for physical comfort, but for the stimulating intellectual exchange, the genuine wit, the sense of being truly understood and appreciated. Her salon became a vibrant intellectual hub, a place where ideas were exchanged freely, where art was discussed, where alliances were forged, and where the often stifling etiquette of court could be momentarily set aside. You feel the palpable energy in the room, the spark of minds engaging, pushing boundaries, perhaps even challenging established norms. She was also a master of the art of listening. You feel her gaze upon you, attentive and genuine as you speak. She does not interrupt. She does not dismiss your thoughts. Instead, she absorbs your words, processes them, and then responds in a way that makes you feel heard, validated, and perhaps even more insightful than you truly are. This gift of deep listening, coupled with her profound empathy and understanding of human psychology, was one of her most potent tools. She understood that to influence someone, you must first understand their desires, their fears, their ambitions, and their vulnerabilities. You realize she is building a comprehensive mental map of your inner world, not to exploit it crudely, but to navigate it with skill and sensitivity. Her influence was rarely overt. You would seldom find her directly advising a ruler in public or dictating policy. Her power was far more subtle, a delicate dance of suggestion and persuasion. She might, during a relaxed evening, subtly introduce a new perspective on a pending decision, perhaps referencing a historical precedent or sharing a seemingly casual anecdote that perfectly illustrates the potential consequences of one path versus another. She might connect two individuals whose alliance would serve her interests, skillfully arranging their introduction and subtly highlighting their mutual benefits. You witness her planting seeds, gently nudging opinions, shaping the intellectual and emotional landscape around her. She was a silent architect of influence, her hand unseen but her impact undeniable. Consider her role as a cultural arbiter. You notice the cut of her gown, the style of her hair, the jewels she chooses. These are not arbitrary selections, they are statements. She might introduce a new fashion trend, a particular piece of music, a certain poet whose verses she admires. Her tastes become the height of sophistication, emulated by those who wish to be seen as fashionable and discerning. She curated not just her own image, but also the cultural climate of her immediate circle. Her approval could elevate an artist, launch a writer's career, or bring a new idea into vogue. You see her shaping the very aesthetic and intellectual currents of her time, acting as a living, breathing muse and tastemaker. This mastery of charm, wit, and influence was not simply about attracting powerful men. It was about building a network, a web of relationships that extended far beyond her immediate companions. You realize she collected information like a scholar collects rare texts. Every conversation was an opportunity to learn something new. A court secret, a political shift, a personal ambition. She had her own informal intelligence network, often comprised of servants, merchants, and other courtesans who, for various reasons, were willing to share what they knew. This intelligence allowed her to anticipate events, to navigate dangers, and to seize opportunities with uncanny foresight. You see her as a chess master, always several moves ahead, orchestrating events from behind the scenes. Her ability to navigate complex social hierarchies was exceptional. You observe her interacting with a prince one moment, a renowned scholar the next, and a visiting merchant after that, adjusting her demeanor, her language, and her topic of conversation with effortless fluidity. She made each person feel uniquely important, valued for their individual contributions and perspectives. This adaptability, this social chameleon-like quality, allowed her to bridge divides, to foster connections, and to ensure that her own position remained secure and her influence pervasive. Ultimately, her power lay in her ability to make herself indispensable, not through force or inherited right, but through sheer intellectual and emotional prowess. You understand now that her life was a constant performance, a grand production where she was both the playwright and the star. Every word, every gesture, every interaction was carefully considered, yet delivered with a natural grace that made it seem spontaneous and genuine. This was the ultimate illusion, the mastery of an art form so subtle that its very artifice was concealed. You witness her transforming not just her own fate, but subtly altering the course of lives around her, influencing decisions that reverberated through the very halls of power. She was a bridge between the worlds of intellect and sensuality, of politics and poetry, of power and pleasure. Her charm was not a superficial veneer, but a deeply integrated aspect of her being, honed to perfection. Her wit was a rapier mind, always engaged, always seeking to understand and to illuminate. And her influence, though often uncredited, was a quiet, persistent force that shaped the contours of the medieval world in ways historians are only now beginning to fully appreciate. She stands before you not as a passive recipient of male attention, but as an active agent, a formidable force who wielded her intellect and charisma with the precision of a master artisan, leaving an indelible, if often invisible, mark on her age. You stand on the threshold of a new chamber now, one far grander, more ornate, and infinitely more perilous. The very air around you hums with unspoken desires, ambition, and the faint, metallic scent of power. You have glimpsed the courtesan's mastery, her exquisite shaping of her own destiny, but now you see her ascend to the very pinnacle of influence, directly into the radiant, yet treacherous orbit of crowns and thrones. Her indelible, if often invisible, mark on her age, you realize, was nowhere more profoundly etched than within the gilded cages of royal courts. Imagine yourself stepping into a medieval royal court. The heavy tapestries lining the walls seem to absorb all sound, save for the rustle of silk and the murmur of hushed conversations. Torches flicker in their sconces, casting long, dancing shadows that make every corner seem to hold a secret. You can almost feel the weight of expectation, the undercurrent of tension, the delicate dance of hierarchy and hidden agendas. It is a world of dazzling display and brutal reality, where reputations are forged and shattered in a single whispered word, and fortunes are won and lost with a casual glance. Here, amidst the glitter and the veiled threats, the courtesan is no mere ornament, no fleeting pleasure. She is a vital, if unofficial, cog in the intricate machinery of state. Her scandalous life, as history often labels it, was in reality a carefully constructed existence, a testament to her profound understanding of human nature and the levers of power. You watch her move through the crowded hall, a figure of serene confidence amidst the chaos. Heads turn not just in admiration, but in acknowledgement of her undeniable sway. She holds a position of power that few women of her era, outside of queens by birth or marriage, could ever hope to attain. Consider the king himself, burdened by the immense weight of his crown, surrounded by sycophants and schemers, each vying for his attention, each with their own agenda. To whom can he truly speak his mind? To whom can he confess his doubts, his fears, his secret strategies, without fear of betrayal or manipulation? Often it was to the courtesan. You see her in his private chambers, not just a lover but a confidant. The soft glow of a single candle illuminates their faces. He speaks, his voice low, his expression troubled. She listens, her gaze unwavering, her mind already sifting through the implications, weighing the possibilities, offering a quiet, reasoned perspective. Her value was not simply in her beauty or her charm. These were but the keys that unlocked the doors of access. Her true currency was trust, discretion, and an astute intelligence. You realize she became a unique kind of advisor, one outside the formal power structures, unbound by the oaths of fealty that often blinded official counselors to the truth. She could offer a perspective unclouded by family allegiances or political factions, a mirror in which the ruler could see a reflection less distorted by self-interest. You observe how a king might confide in her about a looming war, a difficult diplomatic negotiation, or even a challenge to his authority from within his own court. Her counsel, delivered subtly, often seemed to arise organically from their conversations, rather than as direct, overt intervention, making it all the more potent. This privileged access transformed her into an unparalleled intelligence gatherer. You overhear the murmurs of courtiers, the idle gossip of ladies-in-waiting, the frustrated complaints of disgruntled ministers as you navigate the palace corridors. All of this information, seemingly innocuous on its own, flows into her keen ears. She possesses an uncanny ability to piece together fragments, to discern patterns, to understand the true motivations behind the polite smiles and veiled words. She knows who is in favor, who is falling out, who harbors grievances, and who seeks advantage. This invaluable data, filtered and interpreted through her keen intellect, could then be subtly conveyed to her royal patron, shaping his understanding of the political landscape in ways no spy network could match. You begin to grasp that the whispers in her bedchamber could reverberate through battlefields and council halls, altering the very course of nations. Imagine a situation where a monarch needs to send an unofficial message, one that cannot pass through formal diplomatic channels, perhaps to a rival power or a wavering ally. Who better than a trusted courtesan? You envision her traveling, perhaps under the guise of visiting relatives or taking the waters at a fashionable spa, yet carrying with her not documents but nuances, inflections, the unwritten intentions of a king. Her ability to charm, to persuade, to read the unspoken signals of foreign courts made her an exceptionally potent, albeit covert, ambassador. She could gauge the true temper of a rival ruler, sense weaknesses in their position, or identify opportunities for alliance, all while sipping wine and exchanging pleasantries at a formal dinner. You watch her navigate these intricate social landscapes with the grace of a dancer and the cunning of a seasoned diplomat. Her influence also extended deeply into the economic sphere. Gifts flowed, certainly lavish and frequent, signs of royal favor, but many courtesans were far too shrewd to merely hoard baubles. You see her investing not just in jewels but in land, in mercantile ventures, in the burgeoning industries of the time. She might own vast tracts of property in the city, controlling rents and businesses. She might finance voyages of trade to distant lands, understanding the lucrative potential of exotic goods and new markets. Her accumulated wealth was not merely a symbol of her allure, but a foundation for her independence and a source of her continued power. She became a formidable economic force in her own right, her financial decisions sometimes impacting local markets or even broader trade routes. You might notice the profound respect shown to her by merchants and financiers, a respect born not just of her connection to the crown, but of her own demonstrable financial acumen and business savvy. Furthermore, many of these women were deeply cultivated, true patrons of the arts and letters. You discover that their salons became vibrant centers of intellectual life, drawing poets, philosophers, musicians, and artists from across the land. Here, surrounded by exquisite tapestries and the soft glow of lamplight, ideas were exchanged freely, new works conceived, and cultural movements fostered. Her patronage lent prestige and financial stability to creative endeavors that might otherwise have struggled to find support. You might hear the delicate strains of a new lute composition dedicated to her, or read verses praising her wit and beauty, yet subtly acknowledging her profound intellectual depth and understanding. She shaped not just politics and economics, but the very cultural fabric of her era, her influence permeating the arts in ways we are only now starting to fully appreciate. Yet you must also recognize the precarious tightrope she walked. Her power, though immense, was always contingent. It rested on the fickle affections of powerful men, the shifting sands of court politics, and the ever-present threat of jealousy and intrigue from rivals. A single misstep, a change in royal favor, the rise of a new rival at court, or a broader political upheaval could shatter her world overnight, stripping her of everything she had meticulously built. You feel the constant tension beneath her composed exterior, the awareness that her position was never truly secure. She lived with the knowledge that her reputation, her fortune, and even her life could be forfeit if she lost her footing. The scandalous label often served as a convenient tool for her enemies, a moral condemnation used to undermine her influence when other attacks failed, a weapon wielded by those who feared her unofficial power. You understand now that the term courtesan itself often belies the immense complexity and agency of these women. They were strategists, intellectuals, entrepreneurs, diplomats, and confidants, operating with unparalleled skill within a society that offered few other avenues for female power outside of inherited nobility or religious orders. They carved their own path, not by passively accepting their lot, but by actively shaping it with unparalleled skill, courage, and a deep understanding of the human heart and mind. Their lives, far from being merely scandalous, were extraordinary feats of navigation and influence, leaving an indelible, if often invisible, mark on their age. You see her not as a footnote in history, but as a central player, a master weaver of destinies, whose story continues to unfold, revealing new layers of depth and impact. Her story invites you to look beyond the superficial, to understand the true nature of power and the diverse forms it can take, especially in the hands of a woman deemed merely a courtesan. You step out of the shadows of a narrow alley, the cobblestones cool beneath your worn boots, and suddenly the medieval street opens up before you. The air, usually thick with the smells of refuse and damp earth, here carries a faint whisper of rosewater and exotic spices. Your eyes are immediately drawn not to the stern gray walls of the cathedral, nor to the bustling market stalls, but to a flash of vibrant color passing by. It is a woman, perhaps, or a glimpse of her retinue, draped in silks so fine they seem to ripple like water in the hazy sunlight. This is a world where status is broadcast not just by lineage, but by the very cloth on one's back, the glint of metal around one's neck, the very scent that precedes your arrival. You are witnessing firsthand the intricate dance between power and display, a dance mastered by the women we call courtesans. Their lives, far from being lived in quiet corners, were often a vivid spectacle of opulence, a deliberate challenge to the strict social hierarchies of their time. They understood that the true nature of power, as you have begun to grasp, is not always found in crowns or titles. Sometimes it is woven into a shimmering gown embedded in a jewel, or served on a silver platter. It is a power that demands attention, respect, and, crucially, desire. Consider the clothes. While most women in medieval society were bound by the somber palette of undyed wool and linen, dictated by their station and access, a courtesan often wore the rainbow. You might see her in a gown of shimmering crimson silk, dyed with expensive cochineal imported from distant lands, its fabric flowing with an almost liquid grace. Perhaps it is velvet, rich and plush, in a deep sapphire blue, trimmed with the soft, luxurious fur of sable or ermine, furs usually reserved for nobility of the highest rank. Her sleeves might be impossibly wide, lined with contrasting fabric, or her bodice intricately embroidered with threads of real gold or silver, catching the light as she moves. Around her neck, you would likely see not a simple cross, but a necklace of polished pearls, perhaps a chain of intricately worked gold, set with cabochon rubies or sapphires, each stone a small fortune. Rings would adorn her fingers not merely for adornment, but as symbols of her wealth and the gifts bestowed by powerful admirers. Her hair, often styled elaborately, might be adorned with delicate jeweled nets or ribbons of the finest silk. And the scent that wafts from her as she passes? Not the common aroma of smoke and sweat, but a blend of musk, ambergris and rose oil, imported from the East, a fragrance so rare and costly that it alone announced her singular status. It was not just her person that spoke of her affluence. Her home, often a grand house within the city walls, was a sanctuary of comfort and beauty. Imagine stepping through its carved wooden doors. You would find not the sparse, functional furnishings of an ordinary dwelling, but rooms adorned with richly woven tapestries depicting fantastical scenes or historical events. Cushions piled high with exotic fabrics would invite you to recline on polished benches. The air would be warm from a finely crafted fireplace, perhaps even scented with burning frankincense or myrrh. Fine pottery and silver plate would gleam on polished wooden tables. Musicians might play soft lutes or harps in an antechamber, their melodies a gentle backdrop to conversation and laughter. Furthermore, many of these women were deeply cultivated, true patrons of the arts and letters. You discover that their salons became vibrant centers of intellectual life, drawing poets, philosophers, musicians, and artists from across the land. Here, surrounded by exquisite tapestries and the soft glow of lamplight, ideas were exchanged freely, new works conceived, and cultural movements fostered. Her patronage lent prestige and financial stability to creative endeavors that might otherwise have struggled to find support. You might hear the delicate strains of a new lute composition dedicated to her, or read verses praising her wit and beauty, yet subtly acknowledging her profound intellectual depth and understanding. She shaped not just politics and economics, but the very cultural fabric of her era, her influence permeating the arts in ways we are only now starting to fully appreciate. Yet you must also recognize the precarious tightrope she walked. Her power, though immense, was always contingent. It rested on the fickle affections of powerful men, the shifting sands of court politics, and the ever-present threat of jealousy and intrigue from rivals. A single misstep, a change in royal favor, the rise of a new rival at court, or a broader political upheaval could shatter her world overnight, stripping her of everything she had meticulously built. You feel the constant tension beneath her composed exterior, the awareness that her position was never truly secure. She lived with the knowledge that her reputation, her fortune, and even her life could be forfeit if she lost her footing. The scandalous label often served as a convenient tool for her enemies, a moral condemnation used to undermine her influence when other attacks failed, a weapon wielded by those who feared her unofficial power. You understand now that the term courtesan itself often belies the immense complexity and agency of these women. They were strategists, intellectuals, entrepreneurs, diplomats, and confidants, operating with unparalleled skill within a society that offered few other avenues for female power outside of inherited nobility or religious orders. They carved their own path, not by passively accepting their lot, but by actively shaping it with unparalleled skill, courage, and a deep understanding of the human heart and mind. Their lives, far from being merely scandalous, were extraordinary feats of navigation and influence, leaving an indelible, if often invisible, mark on their age. You see her not as a footnote in history, but as a central player, a master weaver of destinies, whose story continues to unfold, revealing new layers of depth and impact. Her story invites you to look beyond the superficial, to understand the true nature of power and the diverse forms it can take, especially in the hands of a woman deemed merely a courtesan. You step out of the shadows of a narrow alley, the cobblestones cool beneath your worn boots, and suddenly the medieval street opens up before you. The air, usually thick with the smells of refuse and damp earth, here carries a faint whisper of rosewater and exotic spices. Your eyes are immediately drawn not to the stern gray walls of the cathedral, nor to the bustling market stalls, but to a flash of vibrant color passing by. It is a woman, perhaps, or a glimpse of her retinue, draped in silks so fine they seem to ripple like water in the hazy sunlight. This is a world where status is broadcast not just by lineage, but by the very cloth on one's back, the glint of metal around one's neck, the very scent that precedes your arrival. You are witnessing firsthand the intricate dance between power and display, a dance mastered by the women we call courtesans. Their lives, far from being lived in quiet corners, were often a vivid spectacle of opulence, a deliberate challenge to the strict social hierarchies of their time. They understood that the true nature of power, as you have begun to grasp, is not always found in crowns or titles. Sometimes it is woven into a shimmering gown embedded in a jewel, or served on a silver platter. It is a power that demands attention, respect, and, crucially, desire. Consider the clothes. While most women in medieval society were bound by the somber palette of undyed wool and linen, dictated by their station and access, a courtesan often wore the rainbow. You might see her in a gown of shimmering crimson silk, dyed with expensive cochineal imported from distant lands, its fabric flowing with an almost liquid grace. Perhaps it is velvet, rich and plush, in a deep sapphire blue, trimmed with the soft, luxurious fur of sable or ermine, furs usually reserved for nobility of the highest rank. Her sleeves might be impossibly wide, lined with contrasting fabric, or her bodice intricately embroidered with threads of real gold or silver, catching the light as she moves. Around her neck, you would likely see not a simple cross, but a necklace of polished pearls, perhaps a chain of intricately worked gold, set with cabochon rubies or sapphires, each stone a small fortune. Rings would adorn her fingers, not merely for adornment, but as symbols of her wealth and the gifts bestowed by powerful admirers. Her hair, often styled elaborately, might be adorned with delicate jeweled nets or ribbons of the finest silk. And the scent that wafts from her as she passes? Not the common aroma of smoke and sweat, but a blend of musk, ambergris and rose oil, imported from the East, a fragrance so rare and costly that it alone announced her singular status. It was not just her person that spoke of her affluence. Her home, often a grand house within the city walls, was a sanctuary of comfort and beauty. Imagine stepping through its carved wooden doors. You would find not the sparse, functional furnishings of an ordinary dwelling, but rooms adorned with richly woven tapestries depicting fantastical scenes or historical events. Cushions piled high with exotic fabrics would invite you to recline on polished benches. The air would be warm from a finely crafted fireplace, perhaps even scented with burning frankincense or myrrh. Fine pottery and silver plate would gleam on polished wooden tables. Musicians might play soft lutes or harps in an antechamber, their melodies a gentle backdrop to conversation and laughter. And the food, oh the food! Forget the simple pottage and coarse bread that sustain the masses. A courtesan's table would groan under the weight of roasted game birds, pheasants, partridges, even swans, seasoned with precious spices like saffron and cinnamon, brought along ancient trade routes. Sugared almonds, marzipan fruits, and delicate pastries, sweetened with costly honey or cane sugar, would be offered as desserts. Fine wines, perhaps from Burgundy or Italy, would fill crystal goblets, their ruby or amber hues catching the candlelight. This was not merely sustenance, it was a feast for the senses, a performance of luxury designed to impress, to enchant, and to secure loyalty. Yet, this dazzling display of wealth existed within a society rigid with rules, a society obsessed with maintaining order through visible markers of class. These were the sumptuary laws, a complex web of regulations designed to dictate what people could wear, eat, and own, all based on their social standing. The nobility had their silks and furs, the merchants their sturdy wools, the peasants their rough homespun. And these laws, enforced by civic authorities and sometimes even the church, were particularly keen on defining what women could wear, especially women whose status was ambiguous or, in the eyes of the law, illicit. You see the paradox immediately. Courtesans, who often commanded wealth and influence comparable to minor nobility, were legally categorized alongside common prostitutes. The laws explicitly forbade them from wearing the very symbols of the status they had achieved. They were often banned from wearing gold or silver ornaments, silks, velvets, or furs. Specific colors, like royal purple or scarlet, might be prohibited. In some cities, courtesans were even mandated to wear a particular distinguishing garment or color, perhaps a yellow veil or a striped cloak, a mark intended to shame and segregate them, to make their profession unmistakably visible to all who passed by. Imagine the frustration, the audacity, required to navigate such a contradictory landscape. Here you are, a woman of immense charm, intelligence, and economic power, living in a house perhaps grander than many a merchant's, yet legally forbidden from adorning yourself with the trappings of that very success. These laws were not merely about maintaining social order. They were a desperate attempt to contain a perceived moral threat, to control women who operated outside the traditional patriarchal structures of marriage and family. They were a symbolic effort to strip these women of their hard-won status, even as powerful men flocked to their doors, drawn precisely by the allure of their forbidden elegance. But here is where the true agency of these women shines through. You begin to understand that laws, however strict, are only as powerful as their enforcement. And when a courtesan numbered powerful princes, cardinals, or wealthy merchants among her devoted patrons, the enforcement of petty sumptuary laws became, shall we say, flexible. Who would dare publicly challenge the mistress of a duke, even if she wore forbidden ermine? Her protectors held the real power, and their influence often rendered these regulations inert, or at least selectively applied. Beyond overt defiance, courtesans were masters of subtle subversion. They might not wear a full gown of prohibited silk, but perhaps a petticoat of it, visible only in a flash of movement. They might accessorize with discreet jewels, small but exquisite, or commission garments that pushed the boundaries of permissible fashion, setting trends rather than following them. Often their style was so captivating, so innovative, that women of even the highest social standing, ostensibly bound by strictures, would secretly emulate their fashions, seeing them as arbiters of taste rather than objects of scorn. The very garments intended to mark them for shame often became aspirational, a testament to their undeniable influence on culture and style. Their lavish lifestyles were not simply personal indulgence, they were a calculated business strategy. By dressing in the finest fabrics, living in the grandest homes, and hosting the most exquisite entertainments, a courtesan reinforced her brand. She projected an image of success, sophistication, and desirability. This display attracted new, powerful patrons and maintained the loyalty of existing ones. It was a tangible manifestation of her value, a silent declaration that she was worthy of the most elite company and the most generous patronage. Every pearl, every silk thread, every spiced dish, was an investment in her professional standing, a deliberate cultivation of an aura of exclusivity and glamour that no sumptuary law could truly extinguish. You observe how this visible affluence also served a political purpose. In a world where women generally had no voice in public affairs, a courtesan's home often became a salon, a discreet gathering place where powerful men could meet away from the formal strictures of court or church. Here, amidst the fine wines and soft music, deals were struck, secrets exchanged and alliances forged, often with the courtesan herself acting as a silent, but keenly observant, hostess and facilitator. Her luxurious surroundings provided the perfect backdrop for such delicate negotiations, lending an air of refinement and discretion to what might otherwise be perceived as clandestine dealings. Yet, you must also acknowledge the inherent precariousness of this existence. For all the glittering luxury, the courtesan's position remained vulnerable. Her status was tied to the favor of powerful men, to her youth and beauty, and to her ability to constantly reinvent herself and maintain her allure. A shift in political winds, the loss of a key patron, or the inexorable march of time could swiftly dismantle her carefully constructed empire of elegance. The sumptuary laws, though often flouted, remained a constant reminder of her legal marginalization, a societal sword hanging perpetually over her head. They underscored that her power, though immense, was always conditional, always subject to the whims of the very society she so artfully navigated and at times transcended. She existed in a fascinating liminal space, both within and outside society's rules. She was simultaneously desired and condemned, lavishly rewarded and legally scorned. Her life was a testament to the ingenuity required to forge a path to influence and prosperity when conventional avenues were closed. You see her not just as a figure of scandalous allure, but as a strategic genius, using every tool at her disposal, her wit, her charm, her intelligence and yes, her carefully curated image of luxury, to shape her own destiny in a world determined to define it for her. Her lavish lifestyle was not an accident, nor was it merely a reward. It was a weapon, a shield, and a declaration. It declared her independence, her success, and her refusal to be confined by the narrow expectations placed upon women of her era. It was a loud, vibrant statement in a society that preferred women to be seen and not heard, or, ideally, not seen at all beyond the confines of their domestic sphere. Every rustle of silk, every flash of a jewel, was a whisper of defiance, a testament to a spirit that refused to be diminished, even under the weight of moral condemnation and restrictive laws. You recognize that these women, through their conspicuous consumption and strategic flaunting of societal norms, inadvertently became catalysts for cultural change. They pushed the boundaries of fashion, challenged conventional notions of female agency, and forced society to confront its own hypocrisies regarding wealth, power, and morality. Their stories are not just tales of forbidden romance or moral failings. They are profound narratives about economic independence, social commentary, and the enduring human desire for self-determination, even in the most restrictive of circumstances. You walk through the bustling streets now seeing not just the individual but the system. You understand that the shimmering gown on the courtesan, the rare spice on her table, the very architecture of her opulent home, were all pieces of a larger puzzle. They were symbols of her power, yes, but also points of tension, flashpoints in the ongoing battle between individual ambition and societal control. The vibrant colors and rich textures you observe are not just beautiful. They are imbued with meaning, carrying the weight of defiance, aspiration, and the relentless pursuit of a life lived on one's own terms regardless of the cost. The courtesan's life, therefore, was a masterclass in presentation. She understood that perception was reality, and that by controlling her external appearance and environment, she could command respect and influence far beyond what her legal status might imply. Her luxury was a carefully constructed performance, a stage set for her power. It was a performance that captivated her audience, secured her position, and ultimately, ensured her survival and success in a challenging world. It is a story that reveals how deeply intertwined material possessions, social laws, and personal power truly are, particularly for those who dare to challenge the established order. You leave the ornate house and walk back towards the common thoroughfare, the lingering scent of rosewater still in the air. The contrast between the opulent world you just glimpsed and the mundane reality of the city is stark. But now you carry a new understanding. You see not just the visible wealth, but the invisible battles fought to attain and display it. You recognize the courage it took to live so boldly, so visibly, in a time that sought to constrain and conceal. And you appreciate the enduring legacy of these women, who, through their lavish lives and strategic defiance, left an indelible mark on the tapestry of history, a tapestry woven with threads of silk and defiance, temptation and tenacity. You have walked the cobbled streets, glimpsed the glittering surfaces, and sensed the defiant pulse of a life lived outside conventional bounds. The air still carries the memory of expensive perfumes, a lingering echo of the lavish world you have just left behind. But as you step away from the grand facades, as the visible opulence begins to recede, a deeper question emerges. What lay beneath the shimmering silks and the gleaming jewels? What drove these women beyond mere survival or the accumulation of wealth? What were the hidden costs of such a spectacular existence? The image of the medieval courtesan, often sensationalized or dismissed, is one of superficial beauty and calculated allure. Yet, to truly understand these remarkable figures, you must peel back these layers of societal perception and peer into the very real, often challenging lives they led. These were women of profound ambition, navigating a world that offered them few legitimate avenues for power or independence. Their brilliance was not limited to their physical charms. It extended to their intellect, their wit, and their extraordinary capacity for strategy. Imagine yourself stepping into one of their private salons, not as a client, but as an observer. Here you might find not just frivolous entertainment, but serious discussion. The air would be thick with intellectual debate, the exchange of ideas on philosophy, politics, and the arts. Many courtesans were highly educated, fluent in multiple languages, and possessed a deep understanding of literature, music, and painting. They commissioned works of art, sponsored poets, and cultivated extensive libraries. Their homes became vibrant cultural hubs, attracting scholars, artists, and powerful patrons who sought not just their company, but their keen insights and cultivated conversation. Think of it. In an era when formal education for women was largely restricted to the cloister or the very highest echelons of aristocracy, these women carved out their own academies. They learned not from dusty scrolls and sequestered libraries, but from the living, breathing discourse of the most brilliant minds of their time. They understood that knowledge was power, not just for attracting wealthy men, but for shaping their own identities and exerting influence in a world designed to deny them both. Their ambition then was not merely for silks and jewels, but for intellectual stimulation, for agency, and for a voice. Yet, woven into this tapestry of ambition and cultural influence was an ever-present thread of profound vulnerability. Their independence, however hard-won, was always precarious. You might walk through their exquisite gardens, admire their fine tapestries, and be dazzled by their wit, but beneath it all lay a constant awareness of their fragile position. They existed outside the protective framework of marriage, unprotected by the legal and social conventions that governed most women's lives. Their financial stability, while impressive, was often reliant on a fickle patronage. A change in a ruler's favor, a new mistress, an illness, or simply the inevitable march of time and the loss of youth could plunge them into destitution. You feel the chill wind of uncertainty, even in the warmth of their grand homes. Laws could be turned against them with little recourse. Social condemnation, though often ignored or strategically defied, was a constant shadow, threatening to engulf them at any moment. Consider the emotional landscape of such a life. While they might have forged strong friendships and even deep affections, the societal stigma meant that conventional family life was often out of reach. If they had children, their parentage was often disputed, their legitimacy questioned. Securing a future for their offspring, especially daughters, required immense foresight and strategic planning, often involving careful negotiation and the accumulation of significant assets. Imagine the quiet anxieties that must have accompanied even the most public displays of confidence and joy. Their bodies, the very instruments of their livelihood, were also sources of profound vulnerability. Disease was a constant threat, and the physical demands of their profession, combined with the lack of effective medical care, meant their health was always at risk. The pressure to maintain a youthful appearance, to continually captivate and enchant, must have been relentless. You can almost feel the weight of those expectations, pressing down even on the most resilient spirit. And then there are the untold stories, the narratives that have been lost to time or deliberately suppressed. History, largely written by men who held conventional power, often chose to paint these women in broad, unflattering strokes. They were either sirens leading men astray, or tragic figures doomed to ignominy. Their inner lives, their personal struggles, their acts of kindness, their moments of intellectual triumph, their genuine affections, their true motivations, are often obscured by layers of moral judgment and sensationalism. You search for their voices in the archives, but they are often mediated through legal documents, satirical poems, or the biased accounts of others. To truly hear them, you must learn to listen between the lines, to interpret the silences, and to appreciate the subtle forms of agency embedded in their actions. What did they truly desire? Not just riches perhaps, but respect. Not just fleeting passion, but genuine connection. Not just survival, but significance. These women were not monolithic figures. They were individuals, each with her own unique blend of strengths and weaknesses, triumphs and tragedies. Some undoubtedly succumbed to the pressures of their world, while others rose above them with astounding resilience. They challenged the very notions of what a woman could be, what she could achieve, and what kind of life she could forge for herself in a society intent on defining her by her gender and her marital status. Their lives, for all their outward glamour, were a constant balancing act, a tightrope walk between freedom and constraint, power and vulnerability. They lived lives of intense scrutiny, yet often managed to carve out spaces of surprising autonomy. They manipulated social expectations, transforming the very tools of their oppression into instruments of their liberation. As you consider their legacy, you are left with a more nuanced understanding. These courtesans were not simply symbols of medieval indulgence or moral decline. They were complex human beings, operating with extraordinary intelligence and courage within severe limitations. They were entrepreneurs, intellectuals, artists, and strategists. They were mothers, daughters, and friends. Their stories, though often obscured, force you to re-examine your assumptions about power, about gender, and about the many forms that ambition can take. They remind you that history is rarely simple, and that the most compelling narratives often lie just beneath the surface, waiting to be rediscovered, understood, and acknowledged. You leave the bustling thoroughfare carrying not just the scent of rosewater, but the echo of forgotten voices, speaking of defiance, vulnerability, and an enduring human spirit. Their lives, beneath the brocade, continue to resonate, challenging us to look deeper, to listen more intently, and to appreciate the rich, complex tapestry of the past. You have glimpsed the inner lives, the intellect, the resilience. Now, let your gaze fall upon the surface, the exquisite, often scandalous presentation that announced a courtesan's presence long before she spoke a single word. You are stepping into a world where fashion was not merely a choice, but a declaration, a finely woven tapestry of status, aspiration, and defiance. Imagine walking through a bustling medieval city street. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and perhaps a faint whisper of spice from distant lands. Around you, the vast majority of people are dressed in practical, functional clothing, largely dictated by their social standing. The peasant wears homespun wool, undyed and coarse. The artisan, perhaps a slightly finer tunic, but still sturdy. Even the respectable noblewoman adheres to strictures, her rich fabrics and furs often draped in a way that minimizes the female form, her head demurely covered. Every seam, every shade, Every fold of fabric speaks volumes about one's place in the rigid social hierarchy. Sumptuary laws, though not always perfectly enforced, often dictated what colors, what materials, and what accessories were permissible for each class. To transgress these unwritten and often written rules was to invite censure, and sometimes even punishment. But then a splash of vibrant color catches your eye. A ripple of movement, a glint of gold. You see her. A courtesan. She moves with a confidence that sets her apart, her silhouette distinct amidst the muted tones of the crowd. Her attire is a stark, dazzling contrast to the prevailing modesty. While other women might wear dull browns, greens, or blues, she might be swathed in the richest crimson, a startling saffron yellow, or a deep, imperial purple, colors often reserved for royalty or the highest clergy, or even forbidden to women altogether. The fabric itself speaks of distant lands and immense wealth. Forget rough wool. You are seeing the shimmer of Chinese silk, intricately patterned and exquisitely soft against her skin. Perhaps a fine Florentine brocade, its threads interwoven with gold or silver, catching the sunlight as she moves. The delicate, almost translucent quality of sheer linen from Egypt might peek from beneath a heavier outer garment, hinting at what lies beneath without fully revealing. These were not just clothes. They were an investment, a performance, a walking advertisement of her allure and her success. Each garment was a testament to her ability to acquire and display wealth, a magnetic draw for those who sought not just beauty, but also an association with sophistication and luxury. Her clothing would not merely be rich in material, it would be cut and styled to enhance her figure, a radical departure from the flowing, often shapeless garments of other women. Sleeves might be wide and flowing, lined with exotic furs like ermine or sable, revealing a glimpse of a delicate wrist adorned with a bracelet. Necklines might be cut lower, allowing a tantalizing view of the décolletage, perhaps framed by a string of pearls or a finely wrought gold chain. She understood the power of suggestion, the art of revealing just enough to ignite the imagination, while still maintaining an air of unattainable elegance. Now look closer at the details, for it is in the adornments that the true artistry of her self-presentation lay. Jewelry was paramount. Forget simple silver. You would see her fingers laden with rings, not just one, but several, each perhaps set with a gleaming sapphire, a fiery ruby, or an emerald of startling green. A heavy gold chain might encircle her neck, or a delicate pendant featuring an engraved gem or a carved cameo. Brooches, often elaborate and set with multiple stones, would fasten her cloaks or adorn her bodices, sparkling with every movement. These were not modest heirlooms. They were ostentatious displays of wealth, often gifts from powerful patrons, each piece a silent testament to her influence and desirability. They were also liquid assets, a form of financial security, glittering investments that could be sold in times of need. Her hair, too, was an elaborate statement. While many respectable women kept their hair covered or braided tightly, a courtesan might wear hers loose, flowing in long, carefully tended waves, sometimes adorned with ribbons, pearls, or delicate jeweled nets. Or, if she wore a head covering, it might be an exquisitely fashioned veil of the finest silk, artfully draped to frame her face, rather than conceal it. You might even see a jeweled fillet across her forehead, drawing attention to her eyes. This freedom with her hair was a subtle but potent symbol of her difference, her liberation from certain societal constraints. And then there are the invisible adornments, the perfumes, the cosmetics, the artful enhancements. The medieval world was not devoid of makeup, though its use was often discreet for respectable women. But for a courtesan, these were tools of her trade, meticulously applied. You might notice the subtle flush of rouge on her cheeks, carefully blended to suggest a natural bloom. Her lips might be stained with a rose tint, making them appear fuller and more inviting. Powders, perhaps made from ground pearls or alabaster, would subtly lighten her complexion, a sign of refinement and leisure, contrasting with the sun-darkened skin of working women. Most powerfully, you would encounter her scent. While others might carry the honest smells of labor and city life, she would be enveloped in an aura of carefully chosen fragrances. Imagine the rich, musky scent of ambergris, a rare and valuable substance from the sea. Or the delicate, intoxicating aroma of rosewater, perhaps mingled with jasmine or civet. These perfumes were not just pleasant, they were evocative, lingering, creating a memorable olfactory signature that hinted at exoticism, luxury, and sensuality. They were a declaration of her presence, an invisible cloak of allure that preceded her and remained after she had passed. These women were, in essence, the fashion influencers and trendsetters of their age. Their clients, often the most powerful and wealthy men in society, nobles, merchants, even high-ranking clergy, were exposed to their exquisite tastes and daring choices. What a courtesan wore, how she styled her hair, the particular scent she favored, could subtly or even overtly influence the broader fashion landscape. While respectable women might not openly adopt the more scandalous elements of a courtesan's attire, elements of their style, particularly in the cut of a sleeve, the draping of a fabric, or the choice of a particular jewel, could slowly trickle down and be adapted. They pushed the boundaries, showing what was possible, what was beautiful, what was desirable. Consider the cost, the sheer investment in this personal brand. Every gown, every piece of jewelry, every vial of perfume represented a significant outlay. But this was not frivolous spending, it was strategic. Their appearance was their most potent advertising. It attracted clients, signaled their success, and reinforced their perceived value. A shabby courtesan would not command the same prices or attract the same caliber of patrons. Their beauty and their ability to present themselves impeccably were integral to their economic survival and upward mobility. They understood that in a world where opportunities for women were severely limited, controlling their image was a form of power. Yet, this lavish adornment was a double-edged sword. While it brought them prestige and clients, it also marked them. In some cities, sumptuary laws specifically targeted prostitutes, forcing them to wear certain colors, often yellow or striped patterns, or distinctive hats, as a mark of shame. While high-class courtesans often navigated around or simply ignored these specific decrees, their overall luxurious appearance still served as a visible sign of their profession to the judgmental eyes of society. Their beauty, their opulence, could be seen as both a temptation and a sign of their moral failing. They were simultaneously admired for their style and condemned for the means by which they acquired it. So, as you observe her, resplendent in her finery, you begin to understand that these adornments were far more than mere decoration. They were a language. They spoke of resilience, of daring, of a sophisticated understanding of human desire and social dynamics. They were shields against a judgmental world and weapons in the relentless pursuit of financial independence. The shimmer of her silk, the gleam of her jewels, the subtle perfume that trails in her wake, these are not just fleeting impressions. They are enduring statements, crafted with intent, speaking across centuries of women who chose to define their own beauty, to set their own trends, and to shine brightly, even when surrounded by the shadows of a rigid and unforgiving society. Their fashion choices, bold and strategic, remain a vivid testament to their indelible mark on the tapestry of history. You have seen her grace, her beauty, her strategic adornments. You have understood the silent language of her silks and jewels, statements of defiance and ambition in a world eager to judge. But as you linger in the shadowed corridors of power, a deeper, more dangerous facet of her existence begins to emerge. Her world, you realize, is not just one of beauty and allure, but a treacherous landscape of whispers and secrets, where the price of a wrong word or a misplaced glance can be catastrophic. Imagine yourself now, standing not in the bustling marketplace or the shimmering salon, but in the hushed chamber of a powerful duke, or perhaps a visiting ambassador. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax and old parchment, perhaps a hint of a burning log on the hearth. You observe a courtesan, not draped in her most opulent attire, but perhaps a simpler, more intimate gown, her hair unbound. Her eyes, however, are sharp, discerning, missing nothing. She is not merely entertaining, she is observing. She is listening. This, you come to understand, is where the true, unseen power of the courtesan often lay. She was an unacknowledged agent in the grand, dangerous game of medieval politics. Her unique position, often at the very heart of the elite, provided unparalleled access to men who held the reins of power. In the intimacy of a private chamber or over a shared meal, guards were lowered. Confidences were exchanged. Loose lips, often lubricated by wine and desire, would unwittingly spill state secrets, strategic plans, or personal vulnerabilities. You might think of her as a human conduit, a living, breathing intelligence network. Her beauty was her atre, her charm her tool, but her intellect and discretion were her most formidable weapons. She learned to read faces, to interpret silences, to piece together fragments of conversation into a coherent, often explosive, narrative. She was not a sworn spy in the traditional sense, perhaps, but an opportunist, a survivor, acutely aware that knowledge was power, and that power could be bartered, sold, or wielded for protection. Consider the scene. A nobleman, agitated by a recent political setback, might confide his frustrations, detailing the weaknesses of a rival, or the deployment of troops along a contested border. He might lament the king's latest decree, revealing its true, unpopular implications. These were not casual remarks to her. For her, these were pieces of a puzzle, potentially valuable to a competing faction, or even to the man's own enemies. She had to remember every detail, every nuance, every name. Her memory became a secret archive, her mind a vault of whispered truths and dangerous lies. The risks, you realize, were immense. If she were discovered acting as an informant, the consequences could be swift and brutal. Imprisonment, torture, even public execution were very real possibilities. Her life, already precarious, would hang by a thread thinner than the finest silk she wore. Yet, the rewards could also be substantial. Protection, wealth, influence, and a measure of control in a world where women, especially those of her station, had very little. She walked a razor's edge, balancing the desire for security with the constant threat of exposure. The game of espionage, however, was not only played by courtesans for external powers. It was also played amongst themselves. Rivalries were fierce, fueled by competition for patrons, for wealth, and for status. Imagine two courtesans, each vying for the attention of a powerful cardinal. You see one, perhaps more subtle, more cunning, planting a seed of doubt about her competitor in the cardinal's ear. She might subtly hint at a past indiscretion, a questionable association, or even a perceived disloyalty. These were not catfights over pretty baubles. These were strategic maneuvers designed to undermine, to discredit, to eliminate a rival for vital resources. You watch as a courtesan, known for her sharp wit, subtly manipulates a conversation at a crowded banquet. She might subtly steer the discussion towards a topic where her rival is known to have an embarrassing lack of knowledge, or she might praise a quality in her rival that she knows her patron secretly despises. These were psychological battles, fought with words and gestures, smiles and silences. The stakes were high. Patronage meant income, protection, and social standing. Losing it could mean destitution, or worse, being cast out into a world with no safety net. Deception was an art form they mastered. You see her charming a visiting dignitary, all smiles and sparkling eyes, while simultaneously extracting information about his travel plans or his political allegiances. She might feign ignorance or naivete, lulling her target into a false sense of security. She understood the power of being underestimated. Men, especially powerful men, often saw courtesans as mere ornaments, as objects of pleasure, failing to recognize the keen intelligence and strategic mind behind the alluring facade. This perception was her greatest camouflage. Her very existence was a form of deception. She presented herself as a woman of pleasure, but she was also often a shrewd businesswoman, a skilled politician, and sometimes an unwitting spy. Her life was a performance, every gesture, every word carefully chosen to achieve a desired effect. You might observe her feigning distress to elicit sympathy, or feigning delight to encourage generosity. She was an actress on a grand stage, playing multiple roles simultaneously, constantly adapting her script to her audience. Consider the layers of these dangerous games. You might encounter a courtesan who is genuinely fond of her patron, yet compelled by circumstances or necessity to betray his confidences. Or a courtesan who is herself being manipulated by a more powerful figure, forced to gather information against her will. The moral ambiguities of her world were profound. Loyalty was a luxury she often could not afford. Survival dictated her allegiances, and sometimes, those allegiances shifted as quickly as the political winds. You see her at a royal court, moving through a throng of nobles, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents of intrigue. Yet her ears are attuned to every whisper, her eyes scan every gesture. A fleeting glance exchanged between two courtiers, a sudden silence in a conversation, a nervous laugh, these are all data points for her. She is a human censor, constantly processing information, assessing threats, identifying opportunities. She learned to read the subtle language of power, the unwritten rules of the court. Her nights were not always filled with dalliance and revelry. Often they were spent analyzing, planning, deciding how to use the fragments of information she had gathered. Should she pass it on to a trusted intermediary? Should she use it to her own advantage? Or should she bury it, knowing that revealing it might put her in even greater peril? These were life and death decisions, made in the lonely hours before dawn, with only her keen mind as your guide. The danger was not always external. There was the constant psychological toll. The paranoia, the distrust, the necessity of maintaining a facade at all times. You feel the weight of that burden as you observe her, ever watchful, ever cautious. Her charm, her wit, her seemingly carefree demeanor were often a carefully constructed shield, hiding a mind perpetually calculating, perpetually on guard. Her life was a high-wire act, performed without a net. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and everything could come crashing down. Yet it was precisely this proximity to danger, this dance with deception, that often made her indispensable to those in power. She was the one who could go where others could not, hear what others were not meant to hear, and bring back the vital intelligence that could tip the scales of fate. As you step back from this shadowed world of medieval espionage, you are left with a profound appreciation for the sheer audacity and intelligence of these women. They were not merely beautiful faces or compliant companions. They were players in a game far larger and more perilous than most ever realized. They navigated a landscape of daggers and deception with remarkable skill, often transforming their vulnerability into a source of unexpected power. Their lives, though scandalous in the eyes of society, were often a masterclass in survival, strategy, and the subtle, dangerous art of influence. They proved that even in the most restrictive of societies, a clever mind and an unyielding spirit could find a way to forge a path, however treacherous, through the very heart of power. They were indeed masters of a dangerous game played for the highest stakes. You have just glimpsed the sharp, glittering edge of the courtesan's world, a realm of intrigue and dangerous whispers. Now, turn your gaze from the shadowed alleyways and secret chambers to the flickering candlelight of a different kind of salon. Here, the weapon is not a dagger or a whispered secret, but the rapier wit of a well-read mind, the delicate brushstroke of an artist, or the soaring verse of a poet. For many medieval courtesans, their influence extended far beyond the bedchamber or the council of state. They were muses, intellectuals, and often, the most discerning patrons of the arts and sciences in an age hungry for both. Imagine yourself stepping into a grand house in a bustling Italian city, perhaps Florence or Venice, in the height of the Renaissance. The air is thick not with the scent of perfume and power, but with the subtle fragrance of old books, the faint metallic tang of ink, and the lingering aroma of good wine. Around you, men in rich velvets and furs are engaged in passionate debate. A lute softly plays in the corner, its melodies weaving through the animated conversation. Your eyes are drawn to the woman at the center of this vibrant gathering. She is not merely beautiful, though beauty she undoubtedly possesses. Her gaze is sharp, intelligent, and her laughter rings with genuine mirth and understanding. This is not a mere ornament. This is the hostess, the intellectual heart of the room. These women, often educated far beyond their noble counterparts, cultivated minds as meticulously as they did their appearances. They spoke multiple languages, understood philosophy, history, and classical literature. They could recite poetry from memory, engage in complex theological discussions, and dissect the latest scientific theories. Their company was sought not just for physical pleasure, but for the sheer delight of intelligent conversation and stimulating debate. A courtesan might possess a library more extensive and more thoughtfully curated than many a university professor. Their homes became vibrant intellectual hubs, places where thinkers, artists, and innovators could gather, exchange ideas, and find support. Consider Tullia d'Aragona, a Roman courtesan of the 16th century, though her influence echoed the spirit of earlier medieval figures. She was a poetess, a philosopher, and a celebrated hostess whose salon attracted the most brilliant minds of her era. Imagine her not just listening to a debate on platonic love, but actively participating, challenging assumptions, and offering insightful counterarguments that would surprise and impress even the most seasoned scholars. Her intellect was her crown, her wit her scepter, and through these she commanded respect and admiration, often eclipsing the more conventionally powerful women of her time. This intellectual prowess was not merely for show, it was a crucial part of their allure and their survival strategy. In an age where women were largely confined to domestic roles or cloistered within convents, the courtesan offered a refreshing alternative. A woman who could meet a man on intellectual ground, challenge him, inspire him, and truly understand his creative struggles. For a poet tormented by a difficult rhyme, she offered a sympathetic ear and perhaps a brilliant suggestion. For a painter struggling with perspective, she might provide not just financial support, but the subtle encouragement and understanding that fueled his vision. The role of patron was often subtle, yet profoundly impactful. A wealthy courtesan might directly commission a painting, a musical piece, or a book of poetry. She might host an impoverished scholar for months, providing him with food, lodging, and the intellectual stimulation he needed to complete his magnum opus. Imagine the relief of a young artist struggling to make ends meet, finding an unexpected commission from a courtesan who truly appreciates his unique talent, not just his ability to paint a flattering portrait. Sometimes their patronage was indirect. By captivating a powerful duke or prince, a courtesan could subtly steer his resources towards the arts. She might whisper praises of a particular composer into his ear, or advocate for a struggling playwright whose work she admired. Her influence could secure grants, appointments, or even simply the crucial introductions that could launch a struggling artist's career. You can almost see her, leaning close to her powerful lover, describing a new sculpture she has seen, planting the seed of patronage in his mind, knowing that her word carries weight. These women created an environment where creativity could flourish, where innovation was encouraged, and where the boundaries of conventional thought could be gently pushed. Their salons were often less rigid, less formal, and more open to new ideas than the stuffy academic institutions or courtly gatherings. It was here, amidst the laughter and the clinking of glasses, that the seeds of new artistic movements and philosophical concepts were often sown. Think of it. While noble women were often trained in household management, embroidery, and perhaps some devotional reading, courtesans were often afforded the luxury of a broader, more liberating education. They were taught by tutors who might also instruct the sons of princes, learning Latin, Greek, rhetoric, and classical literature. This investment in their intellect was a strategic one. It made them more desirable companions for powerful men who sought more than just beauty. It made them indispensable. Imagine yourself attending a performance of a new play in a private theater, financed entirely by a courtesan who believed in the playwright's genius. Or picture yourself in a heated discussion about the latest astronomical discoveries, with a courtesan expertly moderating the debate, her own opinions articulate and well-reasoned. These were not mere spectators. They were active participants in the intellectual and artistic currents of their age. Their embrace of scholarship and art was also a form of self-definition, a way to forge an identity that transcended their socially ambiguous status. By surrounding themselves with beauty, knowledge, and talent, they elevated their own standing and created a legacy that outlasted the fleeting judgments of their contemporaries. They proved that a woman's worth could be measured not just by her virtue or her lineage, but by the brilliance of her mind and the generosity of her spirit. As you reflect on this aspect of their lives, you realize the profound impact these scandalous women had on the cultural tapestry of the medieval and early modern periods. They were not just figures of temptation or tools of espionage. They were often the unsung heroines of intellectual and artistic advancement, providing safe havens and fertile ground for the flourishing of human creativity. Their patronage shaped generations of artists, poets, and thinkers, leaving an indelible mark on the world, a mark far more lasting and significant than many of their more conventional noble counterparts. They embodied a unique blend of beauty, intellect, and influence, using all three to champion the very best of human endeavor. As you have explored the dazzling public lives and profound cultural contributions of these women, another, more intimate question begins to stir. What of their hearts? Beyond the strategic alliances, the intellectual salons, and the lavish displays of wealth and influence, lay the human core of each woman, a core susceptible to the universal human desires for connection, affection, and love. How did love manifest itself in a life so often defined by its transactional nature, by the constant scrutiny of society, and by the precariousness of their independence? You might imagine that a courtesan's heart would be an armored fortress, a necessity in a world where sentiment could be exploited and vulnerability could prove fatal. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, within the private chambers of their existence, hearts beat with the same human yearnings that have always driven us. For some, love was an unexpected gift, blossoming amidst the pragmatic arrangements of their lives. For others, it was a carefully guarded secret, a flame tended in the deepest recesses of their being. And for many, it was a complex tapestry of genuine affection interwoven with the threads of necessity, patronage, and survival. Consider for a moment the very definition of love in their world. It was not always the romantic ideal of courtly literature, though elements of that poetic yearning undoubtedly touched their lives. It was often a quieter, more resilient form of attachment, one that recognized the realities of power, economics, and social standing. When a courtesan formed a bond with a patron, was it merely a calculated transaction, a sophisticated form of exchange? Or could true intimacy, profound understanding, and even deep affection blossom between two individuals who found solace and stimulation in each other's company, regardless of their societal roles? You walk through the bustling streets of Venice, the scent of the lagoon mingling with the aroma of spices from distant lands. You pass opulent palaces where many a courtesan hosted her glittering circle. Imagine one such woman, perhaps Veronica Franco, engaging in spirited debate with a nobleman, not just about poetry or politics, but about the deeper currents of their souls. Their conversations stretched late into the night, touching on philosophy, on art, on the very nature of human existence. Could this intellectual and spiritual communion evolve into something more? The lines between patron and lover, between client and confidant, often blurred, creating spaces where genuine emotional bonds could form. These women were not merely objects of desire, they were companions, muses, and intellectual equals. They offered not just physical pleasure, but also a richness of conversation, an understanding that many noble women, confined by strict social codes, could not. This intellectual and emotional resonance was a powerful draw, often leading to profound attachments that transcended the simple exchange of services for money. For a man accustomed to a marriage of convenience, the vibrant, intelligent affection of a courtesan could be intoxicating, offering a depth of connection he might never find elsewhere. Yet, these relationships were often fraught with peril. The love of a courtesan was rarely recognized or sanctioned by society. It existed in the shadows, a passionate defiance of convention. If a patron's affections became too public, or if he sought to elevate his courtesan beyond her station, scandal was inevitable. You can feel the tension in the air, the constant tightrope walk between private devotion and public discretion. A deep love could mean heartbreak, abandonment, or even ruin if the patron's family or the broader community intervened. The stakes were incredibly high. So, how did they navigate this treacherous emotional landscape? Many learned to protect their hearts with a kind of practical wisdom. They understood the ephemeral nature of such loves, the necessity of maintaining a degree of emotional detachment. It was a survival mechanism, a way to insulate themselves from the inevitable pain of loss or betrayal. But even the most hardened heart cannot entirely shut out the possibility of genuine feeling. And when those feelings did emerge, they were often cherished with an intensity born of their clandestine nature. Consider the hidden loves that might have bloomed. Not all attachments were to powerful patrons. A courtesan might find herself drawn to a struggling artist, a quiet scholar, or even another woman in her circle. These relationships, free from the immediate pressures of patronage, could offer a different kind of solace, a space for more unburdened affection. You can almost hear the whispered confidences in dimly lit rooms, the shared laughter over simple meals, the quiet comfort of a hand held in secret. These were the hearts in hiding, finding connection where they could, often far from the public gaze. The emotional complexity extended to their relationships with their own families. Many courtesans had children, often fathered by their patrons. These children represented a profound emotional investment, a link to the future, and a source of both immense joy and agonizing worry. Ensuring their children's well-being and securing their future was a driving force for many, a testament to the depth of their maternal love. You see the conflict in their eyes, the public facade of the glamorous courtesan, and the private heart of a mother fiercely protective of her offspring, battling for their legitimacy and their place in the world. For example, Tullia d'Aragona, an esteemed Roman courtesan, was known to have a son, Scipione. Her writings and actions suggested deep concern for his welfare, even amidst her own struggles for recognition and financial stability. This maternal love, often overlooked in the sensationalized accounts of their lives, was a powerful anchoring force, demonstrating that beneath the sophisticated persona lay the universal bonds of family. Moreover, courtesans often formed strong bonds with each other. In a society that judged and ostracized them, these women could find sisterhood, understanding, and mutual support among their peers. They shared advice, offered comfort, and celebrated each other's successes. You feel the camaraderie in their gatherings, a sense of belonging among those who understood the unique challenges and triumphs of their lives. These were relationships built on shared experience and empathy, offering a different kind of love and attachment, one of solidarity and mutual respect. The very act of being a courtesan demanded a profound self-awareness and emotional resilience. To navigate a world that simultaneously celebrated and condemned them required a finely tuned understanding of human nature, including their own. They learned to read intentions, to discern genuine affection from mere flattery, and to protect their inner selves from the relentless demands of their profession. This emotional intelligence, honed by experience, often made them extraordinary confidants and insightful observers of the human condition. You stand on a quiet balcony overlooking a moonlit canal, imagining the thoughts of a courtesan reflecting on her life. She might recall the passionate words exchanged with a lover, the bittersweet pang of knowing it could not last, the quiet joy of a secret affection, or the unwavering bond with her child. These were not women devoid of feeling, but women whose feelings were often magnified by the constraints and freedoms of their existence. Their capacity for love, joy, sorrow, and longing was perhaps even more acute, sharpened by the precariousness of their position. The Hearts in Hiding were not just about clandestine romances. They were also about the quiet dignity with which these women carried their emotional lives. They loved and lost, yearned and rejoiced just like anyone else, but they did so under a veil of public expectation and societal judgment. Their emotional fortitude was as impressive as their intellectual prowess or their artistic sensibility. They carved out spaces for genuine connection, even if those spaces had to remain secret. Ultimately, the emotional lives of medieval and early modern courtesans defy simplistic categorization. They were not monolithic figures, but individuals with rich, complex inner worlds. Their loves were as varied and nuanced as the women themselves. Passionate, pragmatic, tender, strategic, fleeting, and enduring. They remind us that the human heart, in its infinite capacity for connection, finds ways to express itself even in the most unconventional of circumstances. As you step away from that moonlit balcony, you carry with you a deeper appreciation for the intricate emotional landscapes these women inhabited. Their scandalous lives were not just a series of external events. They were also profound internal journeys, marked by the universal pursuit of love and belonging, often fought for and cherished in the deepest privacy of their resilient hearts. They were pioneers not just in culture and intellect, but also in demonstrating the enduring power of human connection, even when forged against the powerful currents of societal expectation. As you pull back from the intimate world of their affections, another powerful current emerges, one that flows with the gleam of coin, the shimmer of silk, and the heavy weight of gold. You step from the quiet alcoves of the heart into the bustling, sometimes ruthless, marketplace of medieval society. For the courtesans you have come to know, their financial lives were not merely a means of survival. They were a complex tapestry woven with threads of opportunity, shrewd calculation, staggering risk, and the ever-present desire for a precarious autonomy. Imagine yourself standing in a bustling Renaissance city square. The air is thick with the scent of spices and the murmur of commerce. Most women around you, regardless of their station, operate under the tight financial control of fathers, husbands, or brothers. Their property, their inheritances, their very labor, are often not truly their own. Then your gaze settles upon a figure of undeniable elegance. Perhaps she sweeps by in a carriage drawn by two matching horses, her gown a riot of imported fabric, her fingers laden with rings that catch the sunlight. This woman, a courtesan, represents a startling exception to the economic realities of her time. Her wealth, seemingly vast and independently managed, was both her shield and at times a gilded cage. The sources of her opulent existence were often direct and extravagant. You might imagine her receiving gifts not simply of trinkets, but of entire estates. A powerful nobleman, captivated by her wit or her beauty, could shower her with precious jewels, each stone a testament to his affection and his status. Rare furs, exquisite tapestries for her dwelling, a complete wardrobe tailored from the finest silks and velvets imported from the distant East, even a collection of exotic pets from far-off lands, these were all tangible expressions of her patron's generosity. Beyond these dazzling presents, many courtesans secured regular allowances, a steady stream of income that allowed them to maintain a lavish lifestyle appropriate to their elevated standing. These were not mere pocket monies. They were substantial sums that could rival the annual incomes of minor nobility. But the truly astute courtesan understood that ephemeral gifts, however grand, were not the foundation of lasting security. You watch as she discreetly directs her agents to invest. Perhaps she acquires a house not just for her own residence, but another to rent out, providing a steady income independent of any single patron's favor. She might lend money at interest, a practice that, while sometimes viewed with suspicion, was a common path to wealth for those brave enough to navigate its complexities. Some even invested in trading ventures, using their connections to secure shares in lucrative voyages or local businesses. These were women operating with an entrepreneurial spirit that few respectable ladies of their era could ever hope to emulate, let alone execute. They were, in essence, self-made magnates in an age designed to limit female agency. Yet, this dazzling financial autonomy was often an illusion, a magnificent stage set that could collapse with startling speed. You realize that much of her wealth was inherently precarious, tied to the fleeting nature of desire and the shifting currents of power. The moment a patron's affection cooled or a more youthful rival emerged, the flow of gifts and allowances could diminish or cease entirely. Her position was a tightrope walk over an abyss of potential destitution. A whisper of scandal, an unfortunate illness that marred her beauty, or simply the inevitable march of time and age, could strip away her allure and, with it, her financial foundations. The very gold that adorned her served as a constant reminder of this delicate balance. To maintain her standing, she had to spend lavishly. This was not simply indulgence, it was strategic. You see her host elaborate dinners, where the finest wines flow and musicians play captivating melodies. Her home is a salon, a vibrant hub of intellectual and social exchange, requiring a retinue of servants, exquisite furnishings, and a constant supply of luxury goods. Her expensive gowns, her glittering jewels, her very carriage, were not just symbols of her success. They were vital tools in her trade, advertisements of her desirability, her influence, and her ability to attract and retain powerful men. The pressure to always be seen as prosperous, even when finances were tight, was immense, creating a relentless cycle of spending and earning. The legal landscape also posed significant threats. You learn that even if a courtesan amassed considerable property, her legal rights to it could be tenuous depending on local laws and her societal classification. Inheritance laws often favored legitimate heirs, and the assets of a woman deemed unrespectable could be vulnerable to seizure by the state or challenges from indignant families. The shadow of insecurity, therefore, perpetually loomed, even over the most successful of these women. Their autonomy was often tolerated, not legally enshrined, making every acquisition a potential battleground. But for some, the reality of autonomy was achieved, hard-won through intellect, foresight, and sheer determination. You uncover stories of courtesans who, despite the odds, successfully leveraged their position to secure genuine, lasting independence. They understood the temporality of their primary career and planned for a future beyond the gaze of admiring patrons. Through prudent investments in land, diversified business ventures, and even establishing trusts, they built wealth that could endure beyond their active years. Their acumen was often sharper than many male financiers of the era, honed by necessity and an acute understanding of human nature. Imagine a woman who, having accumulated a fortune from years of lavish patronage, quietly purchases vineyards or textile workshops. She might establish a network of agents to manage these holdings, ensuring a steady stream of income long after her beauty fades. Others used their accumulated capital to provide for their families, securing dowries for sisters, educating brothers, or establishing comfortable futures for their own children born outside of conventional marriage. Their wealth became a powerful tool, allowing them to exert influence, offer patronage in return, and even, in some rare instances, secure a measure of social rehabilitation. These were not just women who attracted wealth, they were women who managed wealth with extraordinary skill. You stand back and compare her situation to that of a conventional married woman of the time. While a wife might have a dowry, control over it was usually limited, and her husband held ultimate legal authority over family finances. A courtesan, by contrast, had direct access to and often full discretion over her earnings and assets. This was a radical departure from the norm, offering a unique, if perilous, path to personal power. Her financial savvy was not merely impressive, It was revolutionary in its context, defying centuries of legal and social strictures placed upon women. The phrase "chains of gold" resonates deeply as you consider their lives. The very luxury that afforded them freedom from domestic drudgery and the constraints of ordinary women also bound them. To maintain their lifestyle, they had to remain visible, desirable, and connected to powerful men. Each jewel, each silken gown, each elaborate banquet, while a symbol of their success, also represented a link in the chain that tethered them to a demanding public role. Their financial independence was a constant performance, a dazzling high-wire act where the applause was crucial, but a misstep could lead to ruin. Think of the sheer scale of some of their assets. Houses adorned with frescoes, collections of rare books, private carriages attended by liveried servants. One might own an entire stable of horses, another a private art collection, a third a country villa. These were not mere accoutrements. They were tangible expressions of their agency, their ability to transform fleeting admiration into enduring assets. Yet, even as they enjoyed such material splendor, you understand that every acquisition carried with it a silent question. How long would this last? How secure was this wealth? In the end, the financial lives of medieval courtesans reveal a profound duality. They were pioneers of female economic empowerment, carving out spaces of extraordinary wealth and influence in a world largely designed to deny it to women. They demonstrated remarkable intelligence, resilience, and business acumen. Yet, their autonomy was perpetually challenged, shadowed by the capriciousness of patrons, the strictures of society, and the inevitable passage of time. They walked a tightrope, balancing on shimmering chains of gold, forever navigating the elusive boundary between true independence and the glittering illusion of control. Their story is a powerful testament to the ingenuity and courage required to forge a future, one lavish gift and one shrewd investment at a time, in a world that offered few certainties. You stand now at the precipice of their public lives, having explored the intricate tapestries of their financial savvy. You have seen the shimmering chains of gold, the illusion of control they so meticulously crafted. But turn your gaze from the gleaming ledger to the street, to the cobblestones that echo with footsteps and whispers. Here, in the harsh light of public scrutiny, you feel the true weight of their chosen path. For every jewel acquired, for every lavish gown commissioned, there was a silent, unwritten cost, the price of public judgment. You imagine yourself walking through the bustling squares of Florence or Venice, amidst the clang of merchants and the cries of street vendors. You are dressed exquisitely, perhaps in silks dyed with costly cochineal, your fingers adorned with rings that catch the sunlight. Heads turn as you pass. Some gazes are admiring, filled with envy for your beauty and your evident wealth. Others are sharp, laden with condemnation, a silent judgment that slices through the air. You hear the hushed whispers, the murmurs of courtesan or meretrix, terms that carried both a frisson of scandal and a heavy cloak of moral opprobrium. This was the inescapable duality of their existence. You were desired, sought after by the most powerful men in society, admired for your wit, your culture, your beauty. Yet, in the eyes of the church and much of conventional society, you were a figure of sin, a moral anathema. This tension was a constant companion, a shadow that stretched long beside even the most opulent carriage. The very men who lavished gifts upon you, who shared their beds and their secrets, were often the first to uphold the societal structures that condemned you. It was a hypocrisy that simmered beneath the surface of polite society, an unspoken rule you were forced to navigate daily. Consider the sumptuary laws, for example. You might think your wealth would grant you immunity, but often these decrees were specifically crafted to control and mark you. While respectable women were forbidden from wearing certain costly fabrics or excessive jewels, courtesans were sometimes compelled to wear them. Or perhaps it was the opposite, forced to wear specific, identifying colors or items of clothing that publicly branded them. You might be required to wear a yellow sash, a particular cap, or a unique veil. Imagine the feeling of being adorned in splendor, yet simultaneously branded by it, a walking billboard of your profession, even as you wielded immense power. This public marking served as a constant reminder of your precarious position, a testament to society's need to categorize and control what it could not fully understand or accept. This public judgment extended beyond mere fashion. You lived with the constant threat of moral crusades, of city councils suddenly deciding to cleanse their streets. One day you might be entertaining dukes and ambassadors. The next you could face banishment, your property confiscated, your future thrown into uncertainty. You had to be constantly vigilant, adaptable, always with one ear to the ground, listening for the shifting winds of public opinion or the pronouncements of stern moralists. Your intelligence was not just a tool for conversation or seduction. It was a shield, a strategic mind constantly calculating risks and opportunities in a world that could turn against you at any moment. Despite your wealth and influence, true integration into respectable society was often an elusive dream. You might host magnificent salons, converse with poets and philosophers, and possess a library more extensive than many nobles. Yet, you would rarely be invited to the private homes of the established aristocracy, or granted the same social standing as a legitimately married woman. Your networks, while vast and powerful, existed in a liminal space, a glittering subculture that mirrored but never fully merged with the sanctioned world. This social isolation could be deeply felt, especially when it came to family. If you had children, and many courtesans did, securing their future became a paramount aspiration. You yearned for them to have a life free from the stigma that clung to you. You invested heavily in their education, often hiring the finest tutors, ensuring they learned languages, music, and the arts. For your daughters, you might painstakingly accumulate a dowry, hoping to secure a respectable marriage, even if it meant obscuring their true parentage or claiming a deceased, anonymous father. For your sons, you might secure positions in the church, the military, or commerce, aiming to integrate them fully into the world that largely excluded you. You did this not just out of maternal love, but also out of a profound desire for a legacy that transcended your own controversial existence. You wanted your children to know security, acceptance, and a future unburdened by the whispers that followed you. Beyond securing their children's futures, many courtesans harbored their own private aspirations for legitimacy and acceptance. You might dream of a quiet retirement, a life away from the relentless scrutiny and the endless performance. For some, this meant investing shrewdly enough to retreat to a country villa, living out their days in relative anonymity, perhaps under a different name. For others, the path to sanctuary led through philanthropy. You might dedicate a portion of your vast wealth to the church. Imagine sponsoring the construction of a chapel, endowing an altar, or funding a hospital for the poor. These acts of generosity, while genuinely born of compassion in many cases, also served a powerful social function. They were a way to cleanse one's reputation, to earn a measure of divine favor, and perhaps, a degree of earthly respectability. The church, while condemning your profession, was often pragmatic enough to accept your contributions. You might find a quiet satisfaction in seeing your name or your generosity inscribed on a plaque within a hallowed hall, a permanent mark of your existence that transcended the ephemeral nature of your professional life. It was a way to leave a legacy, to contribute to the common good, and perhaps, to atone. For some, the ultimate sanctuary was the convent. As beauty faded, or as the emotional and physical demands of their profession became too great, some courtesans chose to enter religious orders. You might imagine a woman who had once captivated kings and cardinals, now clad in a simple habit, finding solace in prayer and quiet contemplation. This was not always an easy path, as convents often required a dowry, and sometimes questioned the sincerity of their conversion. Yet, for those who succeeded, it offered a profound shift, from a life of intense public performance to one of private devotion, from the precariousness of earthly wealth to the promise of eternal salvation. It was a radical transformation, a shedding of the glittering persona for a spiritual truth. The inner world of a medieval courtesan, you realize, was a complex landscape of resilience, vulnerability, and defiance. Beneath the polished veneer of wit and charm, beneath the expensive silks and flashing jewels, there was a woman navigating a world that offered her extraordinary opportunities alongside profound limitations. You learn to be shrewd, to be cautious, to read people with an uncanny insight. You also learn to build walls, to guard your true self, to protect your heart from the constant demands and judgments. You might yearn for genuine affection, for a relationship unmarred by transaction. You might dream of a family that could embrace you without caveat, or a community that offered true belonging. These private aspirations, often unspoken, were as fundamental as the drive for financial independence. They speak to the universal human desire for dignity, for acceptance, for a measure of peace. In the end, the lives of medieval courtesans reveal far more than mere scandal. They illustrate the extraordinary ingenuity of women who, confronted with a world designed to constrain them, forged paths of power and influence. But they also show us the indelible mark of public judgment, the enduring struggle for legitimacy, and the deeply human quest for sanctuary. You see them not just as figures of a bygone era, but as complex individuals who, despite immense challenges, strive to build not just wealth, but also a future, a legacy, and ultimately, a place of peace for themselves and for those they loved. Their story is a testament to resilience, aspiration, and the enduring human spirit in the face of both glittering temptation and societal condemnation. They sought not just to survive, but to thrive, and to carve out a space, however fragile, for their private dreams within the harsh reality of their public lives. Their private dreams, carefully nurtured within the harsh reality of their public lives, ripple forward through time. For the medieval courtesans whose stories we have explored, did not simply exist within the confines of their era. They left an enduring, often subtle, yet undeniably powerful mark on the culture and history that followed. You might not see their names emblazoned on monuments, but their influence weaves through the tapestries of art, literature, and even the very fabric of social change. Imagine standing on a bustling marketplace street in Renaissance Venice or Florence. You observe the latest fashions, the intricate embroidery, the luxurious silks and velvets. Many of these trends, the daring necklines, the elaborate hairstyles, the use of exotic jewels, were first popularized not by the wives of merchants or noblemen, but by the courtesans. They were the trendsetters, the tastemakers, their elaborate wardrobes serving as both a statement of wealth and a tool of their trade. They understood the power of visual spectacle, transforming themselves into living works of art, inspiring awe and imitation. Their attire often pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable for women, yet their very status allowed them to defy those norms, subtly broadening the aesthetic possibilities for all. Think of the paintings from this period. How many portraits depicting women of striking beauty and enigmatic smiles were in fact commissioned by or inspired by these courtesans? Artists like Titian, Veronese, and many others found muses in these women, capturing their allure, their intelligence, their often melancholy depth. These were not just passive subjects. They were often patrons themselves, supporting the artists and poets who immortalized their beauty and wit. They understood the value of legacy, of being remembered through art, knowing that their ephemeral lives could be granted a form of immortality on canvas or parchment. You see their faces gazing out from museums today, not always identified by their true profession, but forever embodying a certain ideal of feminine charm and intellect. Their homes were not merely places of assignation, they were often vibrant cultural salons. You would find poets reciting their latest verses, musicians performing new compositions, philosophers debating the ideas of the day, all hosted and often funded by the courtesan herself. She created an environment where wit was prized, where intellectual discourse thrived, and where the arts were celebrated without the stifling constraints of formal court etiquette. She was not just a beautiful hostess, she was an active participant, a sharp conversationalist, often educated in literature, music, and foreign languages. These gatherings were crucial incubators of creativity, allowing artists and thinkers to connect and collaborate in ways that might have been impossible elsewhere. The courtesan became a vital, unofficial gatekeeper of culture, shaping tastes and fostering innovation. Their impact extended beyond the purely aesthetic or intellectual. These women, through their intricate networks and often vast wealth, wielded a subtle yet potent political influence. Imagine the secrets whispered into their ears by powerful clients, the information exchanged in their drawing rooms, the favors requested or granted. They were often privy to state secrets, business dealings, and personal intrigues that could sway the course of events. They could act as intermediaries, softening a rigid position, facilitating a negotiation, or even subtly manipulating the decisions of powerful men. Their influence was rarely direct or overt, but it was a pervasive undercurrent in the political landscape of their time. You can almost hear the soft rustle of silk as a crucial message is passed, or feel the weight of unspoken power in a knowing glance across a crowded room. Their accumulation of property and financial independence also had a quiet, revolutionary impact. In an era when women typically had limited property rights and were dependent on male relatives, courtesans often managed significant estates, invested wisely, and built formidable fortunes. They navigated complex legal systems, often employing lawyers and managing their own financial portfolios. This economic autonomy, though achieved through unconventional means, subtly challenged the prevailing patriarchal norms, demonstrating that women could be astute business managers and financially independent entities. Their wills, their contracts, their meticulous accounting records, all bear witness to an unexpected degree of female agency and entrepreneurial spirit in a world designed to deny them such roles. They were, in a way, accidental pioneers of female economic power. The very existence of the courtesan archetype, with its blend of allure, intelligence, and danger, has permeated Western literature and storytelling for centuries. From the tragic heroines of opera to the cunning manipulators in historical novels, the figure of the courtesan continues to fascinate and provoke. She embodies complex themes of desire, power, morality, and freedom. Her story often explores the hypocrisy of societal norms, the double standards applied to men and women, and the eternal human struggle between aspiration and judgment. You see her reflected in tales of romance, betrayal, and redemption, a figure forever caught between societal condemnation and individual triumph. What, then, is their enduring lesson for us today? Perhaps it is a powerful reminder of human adaptability and resilience. These were women who, faced with immense societal constraints and limited opportunities, found ingenious ways to assert their agency, secure their survival, and even achieve a measure of power and cultural influence. Their lives speak to the enduring spirit of individuals who, despite being marginalized, refuse to be silenced or rendered invisible. They remind us that history is not just made by kings and generals, but by the quiet acts of courage, the shrewd decisions, and the persistent striving of those often relegated to the shadows. You look back at their lives and see not just scandal but strategy, not just indulgence but intellect, not just fleeting pleasure, but an enduring pursuit of stability, legacy, and perhaps a form of self-determination. Their stories challenge us to look beyond simplistic labels and recognize the complex humanity in every individual, especially those who dared to live outside the prescribed lines. They force us to confront our own biases and assumptions about power, morality, and the roles women have historically played and continue to play in shaping our world. The whispers of their grandeur resonate through the ages, not as a celebration of their profession, but as a testament to their remarkable ingenuity, their unwavering spirit, and their undeniable contribution to the rich, complicated tapestry of human history. They built their world, one luxurious gown, one insightful conversation, one strategic alliance at a time, leaving behind a legacy that continues to intrigue, educate, and provoke thought, long after their last silk fan was closed. You realize their story is not just a chapter in the past, but an echo in the present, reminding us of the timeless human quest for dignity, influence, and a lasting mark upon the world. You have walked with them through the bustling streets, glimpsed their opulent homes, and overheard whispers of their influence in the shadowed corners of medieval Europe. You have seen how they carved out a place for themselves, leaving a tangible, undeniable mark on their world. Yet, as you try to grasp the full breadth of their individual lives, a disquieting truth begins to emerge. Their voices, so vibrant in their time, often feel muted or entirely absent from the pages of history. Why is it so difficult to hear their full stories, to truly know these remarkable women beyond the scandalous anecdotes and the material luxuries? Why do their personal narratives so frequently fade into the indistinct hum of the past, leaving behind only tantalizing fragments? Consider, for a moment, the very nature of medieval record-keeping. Who held the pen? Who decided what was worthy of being etched into parchment or carved into stone? You imagine a monk hunched over his desk in a dimly lit scriptorium, meticulously copying texts. You picture a royal clerk, formally documenting land deeds or court proceedings. You envision a church official, cataloging baptisms, marriages, and condemnations. These were the gatekeepers of historical memory, and their perspectives were almost exclusively male, predominantly clerical, and deeply entrenched in the societal norms and moral codes of their era. For women who operated outside the traditional confines of wife, mother, or nun, this posed an immediate, formidable barrier. Their lives, by definition, challenged the established order. A courtesan, by the very nature of her profession, often transgressed religious edicts and social expectations. She might be admired for her wit, sought after for her companionship, or feared for her influence, but within the official chronicles she was rarely celebrated, and often she was deliberately ignored or actively condemned. You recognize the inherent bias in these records. History, as it was written then, was not a neutral recounting of events. It was a careful construction, designed to uphold certain values, to legitimize particular power structures, and to teach moral lessons. A woman who achieved wealth and influence through her beauty, intellect, and social connections, rather than through marriage or inheritance, was a difficult figure to reconcile with the prevailing narratives of female subservience and piety. So, her achievements might be downplayed, her character impugned, or her very existence relegated to a footnote, if mentioned at all. Think of the documents that survive from that period. You sift through legal contracts, wills, tax records, court transcripts, and religious condemnations. These are the primary sources that allow you to reconstruct daily life. For the courtesan, these documents often paint a picture that is incomplete or worse, distorted. A will might detail her considerable possessions, offering a glimpse into her material world, but it rarely reveals her thoughts, her motivations, her struggles, or her triumphs in her own words. A court transcript might record an accusation of immorality or a dispute over property, presenting her not as a complex human being, but as a legal problem or a moral failing. You seldom find their personal letters, their diaries, or their autobiographies. Unlike the queens, the abbesses, or even some prominent noblewomen whose correspondence might offer direct insight into their minds, courtesans rarely had the opportunity, or perhaps the perceived need, to leave behind such intimate written legacies. Their power lay in presence, in conversation, in strategic alliances, and in the cultivation of their personal brand, which was often ephemeral and performable. Their influence was wielded in drawing rooms, at banquets, and in whispered counsel, not typically in the pages of books they authored themselves. Imagine trying to reconstruct the life of a great orator based only on the legal records of their property disputes. You would miss the resonance of their voice, the power of their rhetoric, the impact of their personality. The same holds true, perhaps even more so, for these women. Their impact was profound, but often undocumented in the traditional sense. The very nature of their wealth and influence also made their legacy precarious. Much of their capital was social and cultural, tied to their physical presence and their personal networks. Their luxurious gowns would wear out. Their exquisite jewels might be passed down or sold, losing their specific connection to the original owner. The political secrets they facilitated, the artistic patronage they offered, the intellectual salons they hosted. These were often transient and rarely recorded with the same meticulous detail as a grant of land or a monastic donation. There was also, you realize, an active process of historical silencing. When a woman challenged gender norms and achieved prominence through means deemed scandalous, there was often a societal impulse to erase her, or at least to sanitize her memory. Official histories might conveniently omit her, or if she was too significant to ignore, she might be painted in broad, condemnatory strokes, stripped of her individuality and reduced to a moral cautionary tale. Her name might appear in civic records, but often in the context of regulations designed to control or restrict her, rather than to celebrate her agency or accomplishments. You find yourself becoming a detective, sifting through the layers of omission and bias. You learn to read between the lines of chroniclers who might sneer at a courtesan's influence even as they grudgingly acknowledge it. You scrutinize inventories, looking for clues about her taste and her personal library. You cross-reference names in different documents, attempting to connect a property owner to a woman mentioned in a moral treatise. Every fragment becomes precious, every indirect reference a potential key to unlock a deeper understanding. The silence itself becomes a powerful indicator. The absence of a direct voice, the scarcity of personal accounts, speaks volumes about the societal pressures and the precarious position these women occupied. It highlights the systemic difficulties faced by those who defied the conventions of their time, particularly women who dared to exert power and agency outside of prescribed roles. Their relative invisibility in mainstream historical narratives is not an indication of their insignificance, but rather a reflection of the patriarchal structures that shaped the creation and preservation of history. This struggle to find their voices underscores the fragility of memory and the politics of documentation. You understand that what gets remembered and how it gets remembered is never a neutral act. It is a choice, a reflection of the values and prejudices of those who hold the power to record and transmit history. For the medieval courtesans, this meant that their extraordinary lives were often filtered through the disapproving gaze of their contemporaries, leaving posterity with a mosaic of fragments rather than a complete portrait. Yet this challenge also presents an opportunity. It compels you, the listener, the seeker of truth, to engage more deeply, to question more critically. It demands that you do not simply accept the gaps in the record as emptiness, but rather as spaces where untold stories reside, waiting to be painstakingly reconstructed. You must become adept at listening to the echoes, at seeing the faint outlines, at connecting the scattered dots across centuries. Their silence is not absolute. It is a challenging silence, a silence that forces you to confront the biases embedded in the very fabric of historical inquiry. It compels you to acknowledge that true understanding often requires looking beyond the official narratives, beyond the pronouncements of power, to seek out the lives lived on the margins, the voices deliberately suppressed. By engaging with these silenced histories, you do not merely recover forgotten figures. You deepen your understanding of the complex interplay between power, morality, and individual agency in the human story. You realize that even in their historical invisibility, these women continue to challenge, to provoke, and to inspire a more nuanced look at the past. The quest to hear their full story, even when it remains elusive, is a crucial part of understanding the richness and the often uncomfortable truths of human experience. And as you stand here, poised at the edge of their elusive stories, you might ask, what relevance do these women, these figures shrouded in medieval prejudice and romanticized myth, hold for us today? What echoes of their struggles, their triumphs, their complicated existences, resonate in the 21st century? You find that the journey through their lives, however fragmented, is not merely an archaeological dig into a distant past. It becomes a looking glass reflecting back the enduring patterns of human nature, societal structures, and the persistent challenges of gender and power. You begin to see that the double standards applied to the medieval courtesan are not historical relics. They are shadows that lengthen and twist through time, still visible in the way society judges women's sexuality, women's ambition, and women's economic choices even now. Think about the public scrutiny, the whispers, the moral judgments that disproportionately target women who navigate spaces where power and desire intertwine. The names change, the settings shift from opulent courts to digital platforms, but the underlying mechanisms of shaming, celebrating, and ultimately controlling female agency persist. Consider the economic imperatives that often shaped a courtesan's path. For many, it was not a choice born of unfettered freedom, but a strategic decision within a limited landscape of opportunities. A life of luxury, influence, and relative independence, however precarious, could be a more appealing alternative than the grinding poverty of the lower classes or the constrained domesticity of marriage, which for many women offered little agency or security. You realize this is a theme that still plays out. Women across the globe, in different contexts, are still making difficult choices, leveraging their resources, skills, and sometimes their perceived desirability, to carve out a living, to gain a foothold, to achieve some measure of autonomy in economies that often still disadvantage them. You observe the societal fascination with these figures both then and now. The courtesan, by her very nature, existed at the intersection of public spectacle and private desire. She was an object of fascination, envy, and condemnation. Her image was manipulated, her story often distorted to fit prevailing moral narratives or male fantasies. Is this not a mirror to our own times, where women in the public eye, especially those who defy conventional norms, become canvases onto which society projects its anxieties, its desires, and its judgments? The relentless commentary on appearance, relationships, and perceived morality, especially for women who achieve any form of public visibility or independent success, is a direct lineage from those medieval observations. You also recognize the profound issue of female agency. In a world where women's roles were rigidly defined, the courtesan, despite her dependence on male patronage, often carved out a unique space for herself. She cultivated intellect, wit, artistic talent, and social acumen. She learned to read power dynamics, to negotiate, to strategize. Her survival, and sometimes her flourishing, depended on her sharp mind and her ability to navigate complex social webs. This drive for self-determination, for intellectual and social prowess, against a backdrop of restrictive expectations, is a constant struggle that you can see reflected in the lives of countless women striving for professional success, intellectual recognition, and personal autonomy today. The act of recovering their stories, however incomplete, forces you to confront the biases inherent in historical records. You learn that history is often written by the powerful, the privileged, and those with a vested interest in maintaining a particular moral order. The voices of those on the margins, particularly women who challenged norms, are frequently silenced, distorted, or erased. This historical detective work is not just about the past. It teaches you to be a more discerning reader of the present. It encourages you to question official narratives, to seek out diverse perspectives, and to recognize whose voices are amplified and whose are deliberately suppressed in contemporary discourse. You learn the importance of listening for the unspoken, of seeing the invisible. Moreover, the study of medieval courtesans challenges simplistic moralizing. You are compelled to move beyond a binary of good and bad, virtuous and sinful. Instead, you are invited to consider the nuances of human experience, the complex motivations, the difficult choices made in difficult circumstances. This nuanced understanding is desperately needed in our own polarized world, where quick judgments and rigid labels often obscure the rich, messy reality of individual lives. Empathy, you discover, is not just a virtue for understanding the past, but a critical tool for navigating the complexities of the present. You also grapple with the concept of power, who wields it, how it is exercised, and how it shapes relationships. The courtesan operated within a system where men held economic, political, and social power. Her skill lay in understanding and manipulating those power dynamics to her advantage, however temporarily. You see this dynamic playing out in modern corporate boardrooms, political arenas, and even social interactions where individuals, particularly women, must still navigate complex power structures, often employing subtle strategies to exert influence and achieve their goals. The struggle for true equity, where one's gender does not predetermine one's access to power, remains an ongoing endeavor. The very idea of scandalous is worth reflecting upon. What was considered scandalous in the Middle Ages might differ in its specific manifestations today, but the underlying mechanisms of social control through moral outrage persist. Society still defines what is acceptable, what is transgressional, and it often uses those definitions to police behavior, especially female behavior. You can see the echoes of medieval moral panic in modern debates about sexuality, public image, and the boundaries of personal freedom. The historical perspective offers a valuable lens through which to critically examine these contemporary anxieties and the power structures that generate them.